It was a normal day at his job, which was already coming to an end. The last concrete mixer had arrived, and nothing foreshadowed the impending danger. The workers were finishing the last delivery of concrete when he suddenly received a call, and it turned out to be his brother. He asked why he didn't answer, to which Baek Yi-soo said that it was quite noisy in here, so he didn't hear the ringing. He asked his brother if something had happened to him, but he replied in the negative, saying that he had decided to call him just for the sake of it. He asked if he needed a reason to call his brother, adding that he would like to meet him. Yi-soo asked if it had to be today because he was a bit busy right now, but his brother insisted. Before he could answer, the voice of one of the workers was heard, who was dissatisfied with how the others had poured the concrete. The pouring was indeed poorly done, and the bodies of the dead people floated to the surface, each of them wearing a North Korean military uniform. His brother asked again if he was going to come to the meeting tonight, but Yi-soo was in no hurry to answer. Suddenly, a young guy, who also seemed to be slightly injured, tumbled out of the door behind him. A man came out of the door. He had a knife in his hand, with which he had wounded the worker, and hatred was burning in his eyes. It was Lee Yong-chol, a member of North Korea's 525th Task Force, and upon seeing him, Yi-soo ended the conversation. He turned to the guy lying on the ground. He was a rookie, who said that he was fine and the wound was not deep, but the commander did not think so. He was the commander of a special unit of the National Intelligence Agency of the Republic of Korea, Baek Soo, with a total of 12 infiltrations into North Korea. He took off his jacket to stop the bleeding and then went to subdue Yong-chul, and the other workers started betting on how quickly he could do it. This irritated Yong-chul, and he rushed at the commander with a knife, swinging it at his throat, but the commander dodged it as if he were a childish attack. And then he hit him with his elbow from underneath, into the jaw, and Yong-chul felt it well, but did not lose consciousness. But as it turned out, this was not the end. So immediately after it followed another blow from a fist on his head from above. This time, the Korean couldn't stay on his feet and fell to the ground, which meant that he had lost consciousness after all. For Yi-soo, this fight wasn't even a warm-up. He took his jacket back, saying that it was over. He put on his jacket, saying to patch up the newbie and clean up here. He himself had to go to meet his brother. While removing the motionless body of Chul, one of the workers wrinkled his nose, saying that this is why he never talks about the robot. The commander heard this, he thought for a bit, and then said to just tell everyone that he had a dirty job. He had already reached the meeting place and entered inside, heading towards the main entrance. It turned out to be a luxurious establishment. However, nothing else was expected from his brother. Upon seeing him, the doorman hurried to inform him that, unfortunately, all the seats had already been booked, but Yi-soo didn't care. He said this, but it was clear that the doorman didn't really believe it, assessing the man with his eyes. He said that basic etiquette was required in their establishment, and then asked him to leave. He was still speaking when an expensively dressed man came out of the door, raising his right hand in greeting, looking at Yi-soo, who looked at his brother. His brother approached them, telling the doorman that this was his brother. The doorman's reaction was not late. He bowed, asking for forgiveness, saying that he did not know that this visitor would actually be his guest. Yi-soo said that everything was fine and they had better go, and his brother was able to see the jacket he had come in. On the back it had the words "safety first" written on it, and he read it and said it was a pretty good phrase. Meanwhile, the workers from his team gathered together after a hard day to finally relax and throw themselves their first party in 3 months. But they didn't have much of a celebration. One guy was indignant that the only food they got was frozen pork. But another said that the commander told them to wait. He was probably going to grab something else tasty. The guy with the earrings replied that it would be better if he went with the commander, since he was currently having something luxurious for dinner. They saw cars drive onto their territory, and a man came out of one of them, whom they recognized as the boss. The new guy, who had been silently chewing grilled pork until then, immediately jumped up to greet the chef. They apologized for already starting drinking without him, but he said that he had a project to finish, and then he asked where Commander Baek Yi-soo was. Hearing that he had left early, he said that it only made his job more difficult, putting his hand in his pocket. The new guy curiously asked what kind of job it was, but in response he received a bullet in the forehead, because the boss pulled a pistol out of his jacket pocket. The shot was an instant kill, and the other workers watched in horror as their recent friend fell dead to the ground. At that moment, other people got out of the cars, and the chief said that today they were disbanding their special squad. He told them not to miss a single one, and the workers were overcome with fear, because today not one of them was ready to say goodbye to life. Meanwhile, the brothers were still having dinner. The eldest tried to talk to Park Yi-soo about his work, but he did not listen to him. Finally, his brother pulled out some card, saying that he could make him the manager of one of the restaurants. He placed it on the table and then asked why the soldier was wearing a construction worker's uniform, to which Yisu muttered something about the support of the people. But his brother was not very satisfied with this answer. Pouring wine, he asked if soldiers help civilians in their time. Yisu answered that they should. Then the brother returned to the prospect of working in his company, describing his duties. But Yisu again didn't really listen. Suddenly his phone rang and he looked at the number. It was a guy from work, and the commander was supposed to answer his call. He told his brother that he had to take a call, then excused himself to the restroom. He stood near the sink and talked to a guy with earrings named Shi-on. He had a strange voice. In fact, that's how it was. The guy was sitting leaning against the wall and talking about the food they were eating. Then he told them what had happened, about Chief Jang's betrayal and the disbandment of their small unit. Other workers had died earlier and were now being dumped in the same place where they had once dumped the bodies of enemy soldiers. Baek Yisu told him to hold on a little longer because he was going there right away, but then changed his mind, telling him to run because they were looking for him. But suddenly, he heard shots through the tube and asked Shion where they were shooting, but there was no answer, and he screamed his name in horror, but there was no answer. At this time, a group of men wearing bulletproof vests and masks that covered their entire faces approached the entrance to the restaurant. Seeing new unexpected visitors, the doorman hurried to notify them that all the seats were taken. But before he could finish speaking, his throat was cut. Yisu was delayed, and his brother was already tired of waiting, when suddenly someone entered, and he raised his head, asking if he had finished talking to his subordinates. But it wasn't Yisu. There were 3 armed men in bulletproof vests standing in front of him. So their visit could only mean one thing. It was a special squad, most likely sent to eliminate his brother. But for what reason, he did not know. Yisu jumped out of the restroom, intending to immediately go to work, but armed men blocked his exit. As if to confirm his thoughts, one of the squad called his name, saying somewhere into the radio that the target was confirmed and they were starting the elimination. They rushed at him. One swung a knife, but the commander stepped aside, simultaneously grabbing his hand with the weapon. He hit his attacker in the bridge of the nose with his elbow. It was his favorite blow. Because, as is known, the force of a blow with an elbow is 5 times greater than a blow with a fist. He then snatched the knife from his opponent's hand and finished him off by cutting him across the eyes, the only thing visible under the mask. Before he could recover, another member of the squad was already running towards him, and he also pulled out a knife. But his attack was also unsuccessful. And it was not for nothing that Yisu was appointed commander in the NAR, which also included military training. He let his opponent get as close as possible, and then again at the last moment, he moved to the side, this time making a throw. In an instant, the enemy was already lying on the ground, and Yisu put the knife to the sole of his foot and squeezed his knee tightly. Without thinking twice, the knife passed through the shoe, and the man screamed in pain, clutching his leg, while Yisu turned to face the others. He had taken off his construction jacket and was now wearing a military uniform, as if a different person was standing in front of them. He said their movements were too predictable to fight, but the men attacked again. He fought off 3 at once, but it didn't look like he was losing. Suddenly, the 3 in front were joined by another one from behind, who intended to attack him unnoticed and finish him off. Chief Jang stood with a cigarette in his mouth, silently looking at the place where the enemy soldiers were thrown, and now their people were there too. A subordinate approached him, saying that they had finished everything, and a special squad had been sent for Baek Yisu. The chief asked if they had only sent 1 detachment, saying that for someone like Yisu, 1 would not be enough. He was right. Despite the enemy being superior in numbers, the commander won, receiving only a couple of scratches. Wiping the blood from his face, he looked anxiously at the door to the dining room of the restaurant where he and his brother had dined, and became worried. However, his brother was not so simple. In his room, he had the same painting as Yisu, where he turned out to be the winner. He even managed to leave one alive, and now held a knife to his throat, asking who they were and why they came. But the man was in no hurry to speak, and he cut his throat out of impatience, saying, however, that he had nevertheless been a little hasty. His attention was drawn to a radio sticking out of the pocket of one of them. A characteristic noise was coming from it, and he listened to the message. Someone said to kill Baek Yisu as soon as they found him, and also to finish off everyone who was with him. He was surprised to see that the bandits were still using such old-fashioned things, and the message was repeated. His face changed. He was the CEO of the financial company TS, Baek Do-kyung, the head of the Tason group. He was about to leave the room, heading towards the door, But suddenly someone called out to him from around the corner. It was Yi-soo. Do-kyung asked him if these people were his guests, since he had to greet them, alas, not with warmth. They were sitting in the car, and his brother was trying to repeat the name of the abbreviation where, as it turned out, Yi-soo worked. Seeing that his master was unable to cope, the driver suggested that the organization was called NAR and handed him an elastic band. Do-kyung took it, saying that it was indeed reconnaissance, but he would never have thought that one of the commanders would be his brother. So he was an intelligence agent who goes to North Korea and kills people. And Yi-soo replied that he was not just a bandit either. He was also Tason's boss, essentially the leader of a criminal organization, so he was also quite dangerous and cunning. They were still driving, but Yi-soo asked to stop. But Do-kyung asked why he was doing this, because it was dangerous outside. However, Yi-soo wanted to go out for this very reason. He explained that those people would not calm down until they killed him. But Do-kyung said that it would be better if he dropped him off right away near the police station, and then they would definitely not find him. Do-kyung said that they had already arrived and got out of the car. Yi-soo remarked that he had never been here before. It turned out to be a funeral site, with a procession standing on the stone steps and wreaths with a portrait of the deceased below. They didn't walk for long, and then Do-kyung turned around and asked his brother if he thought he was joking. Yi-soo didn't expect such an answer. He asked him what it all meant, and he began to have a bad feeling. Meanwhile, some people approached Do-kyung. First a man who said that everything was ready, and then a woman who was holding a photo frame in her hands. She handed it to Do-kyung, saying that within 2 hours, everything would be ready to start. And he, looking at the photograph, turned to his brother. Suddenly he showed it to Yi-soo, who saw that it had his portrait on it, and then added that if everything was decided when he died, then let him do it. They stood in the temple where people usually come to mourn and pray for the deceased near his photograph. Do-kyung said that it was just a performance. It's used when you need to clear your name or escape. He said he learned it from the Japanese yakuza, but Yi-soo doubted it would work. Do-kyung agreed, saying that of course they would have doubts, but that was precisely why one important detail was necessary, which he had already taken care of. He said that Tason was a more famous organization than Yi-soo thought, so guests would come to the ceremony to offer their condolences. After all, his brother died, which means such a visit was necessary, so such people will be able to witness his death. Will they doubt it? No, they won't, because if he, Do-kyung, said it, then that's how it was. Each of them had a special invitation, but then a car with tinted windows pulled up, clearly not fitting into the general atmosphere. The security guards in charge of maintaining order during the ceremony thought it was either food or big shots. In fact, Chief Jang was sitting in the car, studying the portfolio of the deceased. He noticed that he turned out to be the brother of Boss Tason. One of the guards knocked on the tinted glass, saying that no one could get in here without a special invitation. The chief addressed the people sitting in the back, saying that this was their last mission. They had to make sure that Baek Yi-soo was dead at any cost. The men were dressed in sweatshirts that did not hide their bulging muscles, and they got out of the car one by one. The security guard blocked their way, demanding that they introduce themselves and show their invitation, but the man in the cap looked at him silently. Then the guard decided to act more radically and tried to knock his cap off, but received a brutal blow to the head. The other guards stood silently and watched for a while, not understanding such behavior. Then they rushed at the unexpected guests, and they pounced on them in response. But it immediately became clear that the forces were not equal. It was a special squad that arrived with the chief in order to complete its mission, to disband the squad, with the commander Baek Yi-soo. The mission of the NAR Special Forces, the second Halra unit in operations in North Korea, they could not fail. They easily dealt with the guards and were now about to climb the steps, where Brother Yi-soo stood at the top with his bodyguard. But the latter turned out to have a completely different position. He began to go down, taking off his jacket along the way. Finally, he approached one of them and said that it was a family funeral, and only those who were specially invited could attend. Despite being 2 meters tall, the man from the Special Forces hit him from below in the jaw, again without explaining anything about his intentions. But the giant didn't budge. It was a member of the Tason group, the head of security, Ha Jin-woong, better known as Hanam-dong, the wall man. He grabbed the man's face with his huge hand, and the grip was so strong that his eyes popped out. Then there was a crunching sound, and the man fell, while his squad mates looked on in amazement because the thug had just broken his jaw with one grip. They rushed at him, saying that he had simply caught him off guard, but Jin-woon dodged their attacks without much effort. He held one of them by the face with one hand and raised his huge fist with the other to strike, but another of the core squad struck first. He continued to strike again and again, but it had absolutely no effect, and soon Jin-woong got tired of these annoying claps. He tensed his free hand so hard that the veins stood out, and then brought down a crushing blow on the man's head, sending him crashing to the ground. He then turned to the other one, who he still held in his left hand, but he decided to somehow get the big guy into a chokehold. However, no tricks worked on him. This time he even got a little angry, and the man prepared for the worst. The wall man shook him with all his might, and that was enough. But then he threw him straight at his comrade. Chief Jang, who was watching this in the car, grimaced in displeasure, asking why these idiots couldn't deal with one person. He had to take matters into his own hands, so he got out of the car and walked towards Jin-woon, apologizing for his subordinates. He said that there was a misunderstanding here, and as he said this, he handed him a business card with his details, which stated that he was a colonel. After saying once again that it was a misunderstanding, he explained that he was the deceased Yi-su's boss and had come here to offer his condolences. Jin-woong thought about his words for a moment and then looked up at the guy standing there, who nodded his head in approval. Seeing this, he said that he would take the boss into the room, and after a while, he was already sitting in front of Yi-su's photograph. He asked, as if he were Yi-su himself, if he was really dead, and if so, how much his brother Baek Do-kyung knew. The brothers sat at the exit. Do-kyung agreed that the situation with Betrayal was really difficult. He asked what Yi-su was going to do with the boss, offering his services to kill him, but his brother thought a little differently. He said that his brother should not interfere any further, but he did not understand the refusal, asking whether he should really do nothing. Yi-su replied that there was no need for that. He would meet with Chief Jang himself, and then they came up with this plan with the brother he pretended to be. He decided that he had pretended to be grieving enough and called out to him, then pulled out a knife using his brother's face. The story was that there was another brother in the family who was a successful businessman and arrived upon hearing of Yi-su's death. He pointed a knife at the boss, saying that it was found in his brother's body. So if the boss didn't explain himself, then the same knife would be found in him too. He held a knife to his throat, asking who killed his brother. Jang realized that Yi-su was most likely really dead. He asked the gentleman to calm down, saying that Commander Baek Yi-su had died in an accident. He thought the thug would leave him alone if he said this, adding that he could not reveal the details due to confidentiality, but the thug hit him. He said that the chief talked too much, although he clearly asked who was his brother's killer. And with these words, he prepared a knife. Fearing for his life, the chief instinctively reached into his jacket pocket for his gun, but at that moment, a girl in Jin-woon intervened. The girl blocked Do-kyung from attacking his boss, and Jin-woong put his hand on his shoulder, telling him that it would be better for him to leave. To add credibility, Do-kyung yelled at him to get out of there, calling the boss a fucking bastard and pretending to want to get to him. The real Do-kyung couldn't believe that he was asking so furiously who killed his brother, and Yi-su's acting simply amazed him, but it worked. He told his brother about this, asking if he had learned this in intelligence, how to work undercover and all that, to which Yi-su replied that it didn't matter. He said it would stop them for a while, but they would come again soon, so he couldn't stay here forever. Then, in the funeral hall, he was not really pretending, his emotions were not a game. He said what he felt. He said that at that moment he really wanted to kill his boss, because he did the same thing to the workers from his special squad. His brother replied that he understood his feelings, but why shouldn't he stay here and not make unnecessary noise? Because the main thing was that he survived. He added that he would give him a job and put his hand on Yi-su's shoulder, but Yi-su asked if he was asking him to hide here and become a bandit like him. After some thought, he agreed, saying that he was indeed asking him to do so, but only because then they would both survive. Hearing these words, Yi-su slapped his hand to make him put it away, and he himself walked out without saying another word. When he left, Do-kyung sighed, saying that they were definitely not twins. He told Ji-woon to take people and look after him. It was already dark. The weather outside was cool because it was raining lightly. Yi-su was standing near the traffic light, getting ready to cross the road. Suddenly, he noticed that someone was following him rather carelessly. It was Jin-woon, whose surveillance always ended with him being exposed. This time, too, Yi-su asked if he was really going to continue like this, to which he replied that it was an order from the director, that is, Yi-su's brother. At the same time, a man in a hoodie was watching them, holding a knife in his hand. When he saw Jin-woon, he hid around the corner of the house. Chief Jang ended the conversation by giving instructions to continue monitoring Do-kyung's house. He remembered his face that day. He thought that brother Yisu definitely knew something, but his thoughts were interrupted by someone's hand falling on his shoulder. It was his daughter who jumped on his back instead of greeting him, but he didn't mind because he hadn't seen her for a long time. He asked how she got there, to which his daughter replied that the seats were hard and she couldn't straighten her legs the whole way. She said the flight was hard because she wanted to see him sooner, and he replied that he would tell the pilot to fly faster. Her eyes sparkled and she said that this was the power of intelligence. But he shrugged, saying that he was busy with paperwork. Do Kyung clutched the empty pack of cigarettes, saying that he would go out to buy more, but the girl, she seemed to be his secretary, said that she would do it herself. But he told her not to be so grumpy and to let him get some fresh air. But the girl was adamant. She said that if that's what he wanted, he should go out with a security guard because it was dangerous to go alone. Then he looked at her with curiosity and then something strange flashed in his eyes. A minute later, they were going down the elevator accompanied by two thugs. He took her words a little differently, choosing the girl herself to go with him. He suddenly turned to the two guards, saying that the girl was his sister Su-ah, and added that the boys should greet her. He approached one of them, asking if she had not become even more beautiful, and he hastened to say that his sister was indeed beautiful. Do-kyung's gaze changed abruptly. He said that everyone who called Su-ah sister ended up the same way, and then asked the man who he was. Instead of answering, he suddenly took out a knife and waved it near Do-kyung's face. But he managed to dodge it, simultaneously assessing the situation. But suddenly Su-ah also pulled out a knife, so now both sides had weapons, and Do-kyung asked if she had another one for him. She said it was hidden under her skirt, and he still reached in there, asking for forgiveness, because the other thug also took out a blade. The first spy rushed at Do-kyung, but was unable to hit him because it was difficult to turn around in the elevator, allowing him to dodge his attack. With a deft movement, he grabbed his arm, then pushed back and stabbed him in return, preventing him from making any attempts to attack. However, this was only what he thought, as the blow cut through the man's suit and he saw that he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Then Do-kyung realized that his knife was too short to penetrate the bulletproof vest, so he had to hit him in the face. He was about to finish him off, but he heard Su-A fall in the other corner of the elevator as another thug was approaching. He swung the knife, intending to deliver a fatal blow and finish her off, and she cowered in a corner. He struck, but he didn't stab the girl, because Do-kyung covered her with his body, so now he stood with a knife in his shoulder. But this didn't seem to bother him much. He grabbed the puzzled bandit and threw him into the wall of the elevator. But then another man attacked Su-ah, whom Do-kyung didn't manage to finish off, so he now attacked them again. Do-kyung managed to block his attack, noticing how Su-ah rushed at another bandit, not allowing him to get up and take the knife. But Do-kyung lunged towards his opponent and knocked out his knife. It turned out that he was quite good at handling weapons. He pressed the man against the wall of the elevator, and with some strange force, he also put the man's knife to his throat. His appearance suddenly changed. His suit was torn, and his body was very strong and covered with some strange tattoos. A scream of horror was heard from the elevator. It was Do-kyung who plunged both knives into the bandit's shoulders, and together with Su-A, they were already leaving for the floor. He approached another guard, asking if he had a cigarette, and the guard reached into his pocket, saying he would look right away. However, instead of a cigarette, he suddenly took out a knife and stabbed Do-kyung in the stomach, who did not understand what had just happened. Then with one hand he grabbed the impudent fellow by the face, like the big guy Jin, and with the other he carefully took hold of the knife, saying that it was a little painful. The guard said that the gentleman had better not take it out, since he had deliberately chosen a large knife, but Do-kyung squeezed his face. For a moment it seemed like the guard's face had shifted a little. Do-kyung swung his knife, but the guard jumped back. Suddenly another curved knife appeared in his hand, more like a karambit, and his face turned out to be a simple mask. But it seems that there was still one real security guard left with them, who told the director that he would detain the bandit. However, Do-kyung told him to just give him what he asked for, which was another knife and cigarettes, and told him to keep an eye on Su-ah. He had 2 knives in his hands. Now he was going to kill the traitor. But before that, he decided to ask if he wanted to say something last. A young man was looking at him. It was a Special Forces assassin from the NAR with the alias Ghost. He said that Do-kyung talks a lot, and he said that his brother was killed, asking if it was his doing. The bandit replied that if he were given the chance, he would gladly kill him. Then he rushed at Do-kyung, but he was wounded. The Ghost asked if Baek Yisu was really dead, to which Do-kyung replied that even his boss came to offer his condolences. But for some reason, the Ghost was not satisfied with this answer, and he rephrases the question, asking where Baek Yisu is. Meanwhile, Yisu walked with Jin Woon, who said that he would guard him on the orders of the leader. Suddenly, they disappeared into a gateway, and their pursuer became confused. But the task had to be completed, so he followed them. Apparently, it was a trap, and as his face cautiously poked out from behind the house, Jin Woong struck him with all his might. The guy barely managed to somehow put his hands out, but still flew away. He thought that it wouldn't be easy with such a bodyguard. On top of that, he managed to land in such a way that he broke his arm, and then Yi Su came out of the shadows and asked if Jang had sent him. The guy said that he was right, and then suddenly added that he couldn't just die like that. And for some reason, his voice seemed familiar. He removed his hood, revealing his face, and now one of his subordinates, Li Xian, was looking at the commander. Jin Woong told Yi Su that it turned out he knew him, and Xian shouted that of course he knew him and showed his broken arm. The commander came up to him and put his hands on his shoulders. He said that he should have stayed with them then, and everything could have been different. But Xian said that he was the only one who survived, so the next time he went to eat delicious food, he would go with him. Then he suddenly grimaced, and when Yi Su asked what was wrong with him, he replied that he just had an empty stomach and his arm was broken, thanks to his bully. As he was saying the last part, he stopped because Jin Woong's face suddenly became very dark, and now he looked creepy. They continued to fight, and he dodged the killer's attacks as best he could with his wounds. They fought, but he understood that he couldn't last long, so he needed to gather his last strength and attack without stopping. He pounced on him, attack after attack, but he successfully repelled them all. It seemed he had full strength. His vision began to blur. The image of the ghost was already floating before his eyes, and besides, the wound was quite deep. He made one last attack, this time almost hitting him, but still, the opponent was strong and dodged. He said that he recognized his strength, because he was quite good, but with these words he took out a fishing line from somewhere and knocked one of the knives out of his hand. The situation was critical. He asked again where Baek Yi Su was. But Do Kyung could barely stand on his feet. He understood that everything would end here for him. He decided he had to try the last thing he could do and asked him what he had already heard, how tactless he could be. With these words, he cut his hair and then surprised everyone even more by saying that he was Baek Yi Su and that the ghost was a fool. He really did look like Baek Yi Su in this form, and the killer even thought about his words, thinking about the plausibility. He said it was impossible, but Yi Su rushed at him, telling him how stupid he was, even though it was hard for him to move. But seeing how he fought, Ghost said that Baek Yi Su, the commander of the NAR Special Forces, couldn't possibly move so clumsily. But as it turned out, Do Kyung had planned everything from the very beginning. He struck with his free hand, pulling the line from the karambit. With his last efforts, he pulled on it, knocking out one of the knives, and with his other hand ran across the bridge of the man's nose. He fell to the floor, covering his bloody face with his hands, and Yi Su asked him if he still doubted whether he was real or not. He told him to get up and fight, and he rushed at him. Only for some reason, the advantage was not on his side now. He missed the moment again as Yi Su grabbed his hand, then squeezed it and prepared to stab him with the knife from the other side. He took the same stance as his brother, who had undergone special training, which made the ghost think that it was really Yi Su in front of him. He attacked again, saying that it was impossible, but now it was more of a self-conviction, because Yi Su was here. He even fought differently, not like before. Now he had strength, and he moved completely differently, which really frightened the enemy. And then something incredible happened. The ghost wanted to spin his karambit for another attack, but Yi Su suddenly stopped him. He pressed his own knife into his shoulder and swung it to finish off the bandit, and he panicked, not knowing how to dodge. At the last second, he pushed himself away and fell on his back, avoiding the fatal blow, but now he definitely felt like it was Baek Yi Su. It was the real Baek Yi Su who stood above him again. Now there was no doubt because only he knew this technique. The ghost told him not to come closer, and in a panic he began to look for his knife, sensing his imminent death. Do Kyung swung his right hand and tensed it. He quietly told his brother that he should have stayed with him and seen all of this. The ghost had finally managed to find his knife, and now he held it out as his only defense, and Yi Su rushed at him. He knocked him down, but didn't even stab him, hitting him near the head, and the ghost lay with his eyes wide open because he fell on his knife. Suddenly, the weapon fell out of his hand, and his body went limp and heavy, and he fell breathlessly onto the bandit. He got up and saw a car driving up to the house, which meant he had to get out of there, because he could still stay alive. Sua sat in the other room, saying that this was too much, because soon everyone would notice Do Kyung's absence. She said that they should appoint a new director, but Jinwoon replied that Tason without Do Kyung would no longer be Tason. But she didn't like that answer. She said that Director Baek would never allow something like that, and she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. But Jin Woong interrupted her. She saw the big guy's tears roll down his face, and he said that there was no such thing as Do Kyung. Yisu walked with his head down, and Shion hurried after him, telling him to wait for him. But the commander was thinking about his brother. Shion blocked his way, asking where he was going, and he only replied something about the wounds on his brother's body. The killer was hired by Chief Jang, as there were many cases where he hired special people for shady affairs. Shi said he understood this, but Chief Jang and his men were not people who could be easily approached. For a moment he was afraid to look at the commander. His face was full of despair, and he said that he would find and kill them all. In the morning, in the Pangyo Techno Valley, a group of people stood on the helipad. It was a small detachment with a commander. It was T1 ICT CEO Kim Taiwan, who was sitting peeling an apple, lamenting that there was nothing edible in Pangyo. He said there was no big money to be made here, so men should play in the wide waters of Seoul. They were at a general meeting, and a man approached a fence on the roof over which ropes had been thrown. It turned out that they were holding a man, to whom Kim Tae-won turned, asking what Chief Jang had talked about today. The man said he didn't know what he was talking about, but Tae-won began to chew the apple, saying that if it was rotten, it should be thrown away. He cut one of the ropes and the man immediately spoke, saying he remembered being told that Tason was having a problem. He said that their boss, Baek Do-kyung, was nowhere to be seen, so they were doing nothing, and this made Tae-won very interested. But then he cut another rope, asking if the information was accurate, and the man assured him that it was all confirmed. He said that was all he heard, so he asked to get him out of here, but Tae-won only cut the last rope. The CEO turned to his subordinates and told them to gather everyone, because they were having Tason group for dinner today. Fortunately, the man who had already said goodbye to life did not die, because to his surprise, it turned out to be the lower floor. Yisu walked along the Majangdong livestock market, remembering how he was told that it was dark under the entrance, and so it was. He reached the inconspicuous butcher's shop, thinking about Chef Zhang's method. If you want to hide something, hide it in plain sight. These guys in security suits were also trained by Chief Zhang, which means everything should eventually lead to him. He carefully opened the door of the establishment, because if he let his guard down, he would be finished. These people would not tolerate mistakes. He walked through the door abruptly, holding his knife at the ready, but to his surprise, he saw only ordinary butcher shop workers. One of them saw him and asked if he was Baek Yisu, saying that if anyone else had entered, he would already be dead. Yisu approached him and asked what happened here, to which the man replied that it was all Chief Jang's fault. He said he heard on the radio that Zhang's men had taken care of everything, so the picture was no better elsewhere. At the same time, Shion was checking another place where, as the man said, Zhang's people had managed to visit. The man placed his hand on his shoulder, telling Yisu that Chief Zhang was too strong for him and he couldn't handle it alone. He said that he had to run, and his last words were that Yisu dole, then the man died right in his arms. But something in his story puzzled Yisu, because he had never heard of the boss being connected to any organization. Meanwhile, Tae-won reached the main building of the Tason group and launched an attack, as it was a great opportunity. However, he couldn't believe that Tason was so weak, even though he was also considered one of the 4 main groups. Suddenly, he saw the situation begin to change, and the reason for that was the appearance of Ha-jin Woong's unshakable wall. He said that he was already the 4th bastard this week who dared to attack Tason. But Tae-won didn't like his words, and he said that in that case, he would play like a real bastard, taking out the knife. But Jin Woon didn't seem to be bothered by this at all. He just sighed heavily and spread his arms, telling them to attack. However, the general attack was interrupted by the appearance of a young man who walked straight towards Jin Woong, who recognized him as Baek Yisu. He said that he needs this organization to avenge his brother, and therefore he asked him to give him Tason. His eyes were full of determination, hatred, and something else, but one thing was clear. He really was going to take revenge. Then Tae-won hurried towards them, but Yisu simply hit him. Then Tae-won, with annoyance, recognized the guy as Baek Do-kyung, which meant that the director was simply hiding somewhere, which is why he didn't come. He had a knife in his hand, and seeing that these people wanted to destroy the Dason that he needed, he began to wave it. His blow made Tae-won's nose bleed. He thought what kind of crazy person Do-kyung was doing, and told his men to attack. He said that today would be the end for Tason, but this only made Yisu even more angry. He fought well. Seeing him defeating one after another, Tae-won shouted for a knife and rushed at Do-kyung, but Yisu reacted quickly. In the blink of an eye, he turned around and knocked the knife out of his hand with one swing, and Taewon became worried. And Su approached him, but he was already scared to death, so he ordered everyone to leave, saying that he was returning to Pangyo. Jin Woong, who was watching all this, remembered his words that without Do Kyung, Tason would no longer be Tason. But what if Do Kyung could be found? He turned to Yi Su, saying that if he wanted to get Tason, then he, Jin Woong, would help him because he trusted him. A month had already passed. The members of the general meeting of the organizations were sitting together again. But this time, Do Kyung was absent from their company. Among them were 3 men and 1 woman who said she had heard that Baek Do Kyung had died, which meant the end for Tason. Suddenly they heard footsteps. It was Yi Su. Then Jin Woong said that in order to get Tason, he must become Baek Do Kyung. Together with Jin Woong and Xion, he entered the meeting room of the General Assembly, which served as a hotel restaurant. He has already managed to get the same tattoos on his chest and arms as his brother, and has also learned his manner of communication. Before this, Sue taught him some things, for example, that it was better to keep your fingers behind the blade because this would give the blade strength. She said that someone might notice them if he didn't watch his movements. It was a meeting of the leaders of the largest criminal group in Seoul, a general meeting whose purpose was obvious. Supposedly, it was to prevent conflicts between gangs, but in reality, they were waiting for their chance, a chance to benefit when the clash occurred, and that was why Tason had to be present. Sua said she didn't understand why he had to pretend to protect Tason, and he replied that he just needed a strong organization, an organization that was larger and stronger than the others. He needed it to carry out revenge for his brother. Meanwhile, Chief Jang stood next to a very important person, listening to the praise addressed to him. He was praised by Seoul Police Chief Cho Won-ho himself, saying that he did a good job and his skills were worthy of praise. Jang brushed it off, saying it was all thanks to his support. But his boss said he was the good leader. However, he then pointed his finger at the mountain of concrete mix, asking why his subordinates were now buried there. Jang said it was a sacrifice for the common good, but the police chief laughed, saying it was like the proverb. But Jang went on to say that officials are now worried and that the Special Operations Unit in North Korea is a relic of the past. He explained that he was under constant pressure and couldn't follow along. But Won-ho interrupted him by placing his hands on his shoulders. He asked if it was really that hard to eliminate a couple of people, since he had no idea how much money he had to spend. He asked why he had eliminated Do Kyung, since Tason was a member of the General Assembly, and therefore should have understood the consequences of this. But suddenly Jang stopped playing the role of a subordinate who was being scolded and told Cho Won-ho not to show off. He showed a police badge with the Korean symbol, saying that Cho Won-ho's role in this project is to keep his nose to the grindstone. He threw the badge into a cement pit, saying they needed a public figure, so if he didn't like his role, he should get out. As he said this, one of Won-ho's guards approached him and grabbed the boss by the collar, asking if their boss was his friend. Won-ho laughed awkwardly, noticing that he had nimble hands. He saw him knock down one of the guards. He knocked him out with some strange blow, then took a gun out of his jacket pocket and aimed it at Cho Won-ho. General Assembly. And so what? Why should it bother him, after all? He buried his own subordinates. Won-ho waved his hands, saying that he understood everything and would definitely figure it out, because he knew the people from the General Assembly. This was what Jang wanted to hear. He suggested that they not let each other down again, saying that he would like to meet Baek Do Kyung. Present at the meeting were Gorang Rest CEO Ryu Tai-hyun, boss of the Jorang organization in Yongsan, HHS Entertainment CEO Han Hae-sung, head of the entertainment company in the Gangnam area, owner of the Cheon-un Trading Company Cha Yu-hwa, head of the Korean-Chinese organization in Guro, and also the CEO of Yilhak Capital, Lee Sung-min, the head of a small organization in Gudo, 9 Knives in Jongno. Just as they were in the midst of their conversation, Xion intervened, peeking into the room and telling the director that the meeting was taking place here. They entered and Do Kyung took the only empty seat. All the members of the assembly were surprised by his visit. Hae-sung said that they heard that his brother had died, so it must have been hard for him since that's not usually his style. Others also took up the conversation, saying that there were rumors of a crazy funeral, so everyone asked him to tell them. Hae-sung placed the cup on the table, saying that in that case, they should decide whether Baek Do Kyung deserved to sit in this seat. Do Kyung said that if he knew, he could have come and supported, but since he didn't do that, then at least let him not talk about his brother. He suddenly took out a knife and stuck it into the table, asking who they were to talk about the qualifications of the Tason group. Hae-sung grimaced, looking at him with both contempt and fear, and asked how they should understand these words. But Do Kyung looked at him with a creepy gaze, saying that he would answer in simple words. From now on, the Tason group will not attend the general meeting. They were driving back by car, and Jin Woong said that now the General Assembly had become their enemy. He asked Yisu if he had a plan. However, in reality, he had no plan. In that establishment, he simply said what he thought. Suddenly, Jin Woong noticed a car coming out from around the corner, picking up speed and rushing straight towards them. Luckily, they managed to avoid a collision, but other cars appeared from somewhere and blocked their way. A guy in a red jacket and holding a knuckle duster in his hand came out of one of the cars. It was Ryu Tai-hyun, who rushed at their car. He broke the glass with his knuckles and leaned in, saying that if he could do whatever he wanted, then let Do Kyung give him Tason. It all started with Yisu's plan. The first thing he had to do was catch a rat. He remembered Ryu Tai-hyun talking about the funeral details, but that was strange, of course, his brother informed them, but obviously without such details. He said that since the meeting was not related to the funeral, it meant one thing. There was a rat among the members who was leaking information. He said that this is why he will not participate in the meeting as long as the rat is there, but there will be no need to look for it either. Back then, his plan was to smoke the rat out of the hole, but now in front of him was the face of Ryu Tai-hyun, who was that very rat. Immediately after the meeting, he took a couple of cars with him as an escort and went after Do Kyung, and now he demanded that he get out of the car. Boss Yongsun, who has the most problems with Tason and also doesn't hide his hostility, he was the rat. Then Xi'an's head appeared from the car and said that there was no need to break the glass, calling him a baby. Tae-hyun looked at him, asking what he had just called him. And when he repeated it, he said that he liked his impudence, but he would beat him up. He struck at Xi'an, but he only extended his hand, blocking the blow without much effort, since he had once worked with the commander. He asked if Tae-hyun was really a gangster, since with such a blow, and with brass knuckles at that, he should have at least hit him. Tae-hyun looked at the guy. It was obvious that he was interested in him, but their fight was interrupted by the sound of white cars parking. It was Lee Sung-min, the leader of the Nine Knives, who said that they should stop there. Tae-hyun mimicked him, saying that since Master Sung-min said to stop, then he should definitely listen. He approached him, saying that they were going to have a party after the meeting, and asked if Sung-min wanted to join. Suddenly, a man put his hand on his shoulder, saying that Tae-hyun had grown up, and he looked at him with displeasure. Xi'an asked Jin Woong who the old man was, but he replied that they were Il-hak's elite, who were the best in Seoul in the past. This was also evident from the faces of Tae-hyun's bandits, who were surprised that old man Choi Jung-ho from Nine Knives was here. He was the executive director of Il-hak Capital, Choi Jung-ho, a second-generation Gudo. Tae-hyun looked at them with resentment and a little anger, cursing Il-hak and saying that Tason was his prey. Jin Woong suddenly got out of the car and decided to greet his old acquaintances, telling Sunbae that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Young-ho was surprised, asking when he had grown so big, and Jinwoo said that he should have visited them earlier. Lee Sung-min, meanwhile, approached Tae-hyun, saying that they would like to invite Dae-sung as their guests, and asked if he was okay with it. He walked up to the door where Yisu was sitting, offering to take him in his car, since the glass of this one was damaged. Still, Yisu got out of the car, saying that it was quite scary, but somewhat expected, and Seung-min opened the doors for him. Seung-min told the two to go ahead and he was going to talk to his friend, but Jin Woong said he had to accompany the director. However, Yisu told them not to worry, saying that the car would be too small for everyone anyway. They left, and Seung-min asked about Taeson. He asked if they were really going to leave the general meeting, to which Yisu also responded by asking if they weren't being kicked out. But Seung-min said that if they left the organization, there would definitely be problems with the others. He continued by saying that there is nothing in the congregation except checks and competition, so it needs strength to survive. Yisu didn't quite understand what this guy was trying to achieve, so he asked the director what his intentions were. After thinking for a while, Seung-min looked away and told Mr. Beck that he needed strength. That's why he was here. Meanwhile, Jung-ho asked Jin Woong when he was going to join them, but Jin Woong said that he was working for Daeson. Jung-ho replied that Jin Woong's past was connected to Gudo, and they had a place left for him. But the big man was adamant. He was loyal to Daeson. He said again that his organization is Tason Group. Moreover, there are things that he must do. But Jung-ho said that he had nothing to do in Daeson, because he would fall today, and it was already decided. Hearing this, Jin Woong turned pale. He was taken to an unfamiliar place where he saw a group of men in white suits who turned out to be from the Nine Knives. They said they would take care of him, and Yisu asked Seung-min what that meant, but he replied that it was the best they could do. Suddenly it dawned on him. He just realized how wrong he was, and he looked angrily at Seung Min, saying that he was the rat. He turned to Xion, telling him to detain Lee Seung Min, and he agreed, telling the commander to be careful as well. And then he hit the driver Seung Min, who was about to step on the gas once Du Kyung was in the hands of the knives. Yisu got out of the car and was already being looked at by a man in a white suit and glasses, who said that everything would end quickly. Tae-hyun sat in the car and thought with annoyance that he had to let Do-kyung go, giving in to Seung Min and his 9 knives. He said that his people were fools if they did not understand such obvious things as the power of Ilhak. He said that he saw them with his own eyes. Just 3 of them were capable of destroying the entire Kanbuk region, which described their power very well. He continued, saying that there were once 9 of them. Now there were only 6 left, but 3 would be enough to destroy the area. He then thought, what kind of idiot would oppose them, however? Right at that moment, Baek Yi-soo or Du Kyung hit one of the men. Tae-hyun thought that if there was someone who was capable of destroying Gudo, he would definitely become the strongest in Seoul. Last night, they were sitting by the lake. Police Chief Won-ho was fishing, and he was thinking about the upcoming crime against Tason. Won-ho asked if he didn't think that Dason was no longer the same, just a bunch of small trash. He said that because of the project of the higher-ups, Baek Do-kyung had lost his younger brother, and now Dason was in complete disarray. Seung Min agreed, but said that starting a war now would be very difficult, to which Won-ho replied that he was simply being evasive. Throwing the trash off the cigarette, the boss said that this was not allowed, because then he would lose everything, so Ilhak should not be careful. And besides, if he had mentioned the 9 knives at the general meeting, no one would have dared to squeak in his direction. The boss explained how he, Lee Seung Min, would become the real chairman, and to do that, he needed to reorganize Ilhak. Then Sun Min stood up and looked at the lake. He said that he would do everything, but he wanted something in return. He said that in return he would also like to take part in the project that the boss had mentioned earlier, and the boss was surprised by his insatiability. He said the project was called One Sink, but he had no idea how Seung Min was going to get a spot there. Yisu hit the man with glasses again, causing him to lose his footing a little, almost falling to the ground, while the others stood there in surprise. Then, he finally knocked the man down. It was clear that he fought well, and then asked if they really thought they could take possession of Tason. It didn't matter whether it was an order or their personal decision. They were challenging him as a leader. He looked at the men in suits with his furious gaze and said that today, Ilhak would be destroyed. Seung Min decided not to wait any longer, intending to get out of the car, however. As soon as he reached for the door, a knife flew towards him. The knife was thrown by Xion, who said that he was actually ordered to grab him, so he couldn't be allowed to get out of the car. The man Yi-soo had hit was named Hyung Nim, and he was now standing on the ground again, saying that he would have been dead long ago if he had been older. He turned to the other members of Gudo, who were laughing a little, as it had been a long time since they had seen Hyunim get hit by anyone. One of them rushed at Yi-soo, but he put out his hand, squeezing it at the elbow, thus blocking the blow. But the enemy was superior in numbers. Another man struck right after him, but Yi-soo was able to dodge his strike as well, only this man was much smarter. It was Choi Guan-pal, the 7th knife in the Gudo organization, who grabbed Yi-soo by the collar and now pulled him towards himself and struck him. And when he was on the ground, another man, the 9th knife of Gudo, Lee Gu-chang, ran up to him and kicked him in the head. Jantok Bae, the 8th knife of Gudo, was already waiting for him when Yi-soo rolled away and swung to finish him off with a powerful blow to the jaw. At the last moment, he dodged, jumping away from the place where the man had struck, but Hyunim was already rushing towards him from behind, and soon noticed that they were attacking from different sides deftly, which meant he had to look for their blind spots and attack when they were not together. The 9 knives of Ilhak. Everyone talks about their former glory, but there is something that everyone has forgotten. At the same time, Jinwoon was fighting with his once good friend, who now wanted to lure him over to the side of the 9 knives. However, there was still something that was unclear, and this nuance was explained by Xion, who realized that he had to intervene. After all, even though Ilhak had 9 knives, if he doesn't intervene now, all these guys could end up badly. Of course, the men from the 9 knives were incredibly strong, but the problem was that the one fighting them was the commander of the NAR, Baek Yi-soo. Xion jumped out of the car and kicked one of the knives in the head, and the men did not expect another one from Dason to come. And Soo fought with all his might. He did not spare his opponent, because there was another reason hidden in his victory, because in this way, he would be able to take revenge. The men looked at him in surprise. They were perplexed as to how the boss of Tason could single-handedly stand up to the strongest organization. Guangpao swung his leg for a crushing blow, but for some reason, Hyungnim shouted at him to stop. Baek Yi-soo recalled the words of his wrestling coach, who once told him that there were no special tricks in wrestling. He said that there are people who are full of strength and have good will, so they never fall, so they can only be immobilized. Their arms and legs must be tied so that they cannot move, because no matter how strong a person's willpower is, eventually his body will not withstand it. Guangpao fell, grabbing the leg that he had just swung at Yi-soo, and it turned out that Yi-soo had managed to grab it and then twist it. Neither Hyungnim nor Seung-min could believe what Do Kyung was doing to Nine Knives. And Seung-min remembered what Chief Wonho had said about his brother. He mentioned that he was a pretty capable guy, the commander of a special NAR detachment, so his brother was probably no slouch either. Hyunnim wondered if this was too much for a normal beating, where the one who hits and the one who defends are switched. Luckily, just when Yi-soo was about to hit Hyungnim, Seung-min intervened, got out of the car, and walked towards Yi-soo. He told them to stop and then put his hand on Yi-soo's shoulder, saying that he needed to talk to him. From the very beginning, it seemed strange to him, because even though Baek Yi-soo was killed, his twin brother was still alive. He told him that such aggressive behavior at the general meeting and the way he acted there betrayed that he was not Baek Do-kyung. But Yi-soo's reaction was different from what Seung-min thought. He grabbed his hand, asking what difference it makes if he knows his real name. He said that it would not be difficult for him to kill him too. But Seung-min only narrowed his eyes, saying that he would like to negotiate. Seon, who had also stopped fighting with knives, formed his hands into a T, as if indicating a timeout. The negotiations were held near the garages and were attended by Baek Yi-soo, Seon, and Jin Woong from Tason, as well as Lee Seung-min and Nine Knives from Haack. Sitting on a chair opposite Yi-soo, Director Lee said that he admitted that they didn't take them seriously at first, but they had already paid for it by fighting. Yi-soo told him not to drag it out and asked what deal he was going to offer, since that was why he stopped the fight. Seung-min extended his hand and was handed a file. He said that not long ago, they received a request to get rid of him and Tason. He said that they would be able to find out who did it and for what purpose in this file. Because, speaking globally, it was a whole project. He made a deal, saying that they would provide them with information about the organization that decided to attack Tason, but in exchange, they would work for Haack. Haack needed a strong organization, so these were favorable conditions for Tason. But Yi-soo suddenly stood up to leave. There was no point in him sitting there anymore, so he said that if this file was the main condition, then the negotiations were over. And besides, if everything was exactly like that, then wouldn't it be better for them to take this file with the data here and now themselves? He headed towards the exit, but his path was blocked by Jin Woong, who reminded him that this was a good opportunity to gain Hack's trust. However, Yi-soo said that it really got on his nerves, because the guys from Haack were just a bunch of bandits who couldn't be considered a threat at all. He added that there could be no talk of any trust in such a case, since it was precisely because of this that his comrades and brother were brazenly killed. But Seung-min decided not to retreat prematurely. He also stood up, approached Yi-soo, and addressed him by name again. He told him to be careful in his words and actions, because there was no such specimen anymore. And with these words, he brought it to the burning tank. Yi-soo took out the knife, saying that he wouldn't dare, but something still made him wary. This guy Lee Seung-min was not a simple bandit. Jin Woong wanted to stop him, but Yi-soo suddenly shouted that he didn't trust those bandit rats from Haack. He said that from now on, they won't tell him what to do, because from now on, Haack will be under Tason's leadership. He held a knife to Seung-min's throat, saying that he would also take their CEO hostage, and Seung-min looked at the blade nervously. Nine Knives looked at all this in surprise, amazed at both the courage and impudence of this guy from Tason. Hyun-nim and the other Knives wanted to go help the director, but Jung-ho shouted at them not to move. He realized that Do-kyung was not satisfied with the proposal, so he himself approached them and carefully moved his hand with the knife away, offering an alternative. He said that he, Choi Jung-ho, the CEO of Nine Knives, would go with them as a hostage instead of Seung-min. With that, he handed the file to Yi-soo, but Yi-soo didn't share his enthusiasm, asking if he really thought he was worth anything. But in Jin Woong's opinion, that would be enough, because if it were Baek Do-kyung in his place, he wouldn't do such stupid things. After hearing about his brother, Yi-soo cooled down a bit and said that Shi-on was then in charge of transporting and monitoring Choi Jung-hong. He was interrogated 5 years ago, when he returned from infiltrating North Korea and was under investigation for espionage. Colonel Kim Jae-wook asked what his mission was, to which he replied that it was confidential information. The colonel said he had crossed military lines and in a North Korean uniform, but he replied that the nature of the mission covered everything. Then the colonel slammed his palm on the table, saying that they didn't like their North Korean operational core very much. Otherwise, he would personally influence his dismissal, because Yisu was wrong if he thought they would do everything he asked. The final argument was that he had probably done a lot of dirty work, which meant that he was also stressed out by the whole situation. However, his interrogation was then interrupted by the then young Chief Jang, who was then working as the head of the Special Operations Department of the Intelligence Department. Upon seeing him, Jae-wook said that catching spies was his job, and with that, he handed over the case of Baek Yi-soo to him. Jang said that Yi-soo was not a spy because he was his friend, but Jae-wook looked at him suspiciously. Then Jang took out a cigarette and walked up to him, taking off his glasses, and then said that perhaps the colonel had not heard after all. His face suddenly changed, and there was a feeling that he himself was a colonel. He looked at him with such a look that he even got nervous. He said he didn't care whether he thought he was a communist or not, but the kid wasn't a communist, and his word was enough. Without waiting for the colonel's response, he removed the handcuffs from Yi-soo, saying that they could go, and Jae-wook only managed to shout that this was disobeying an order. He asked if there was anyone outside to catch the two impudent fellows, but soon he himself came out and saw that all the guards had been killed. Jang asked if he had been intercepted on his return, but Yi-soo said that fortunately they did not believe him, and no one knew about the secret operation. That's when he said those fateful words. The boss said that in any case, he trusted him, because he was like family to him. He recalled this as he sat in Tason's office, looking at a photograph of himself as the commander of the unit that had shot Jang. At that moment, Jin Woong entered the room and said that Xion was currently looking after Choi Jung-ho as he had requested. He was holding his head. It was obvious that something was bothering him, but Jin Woong suddenly told him to let him say something. He suddenly grabbed him by the collar and said that he had made a mistake in his choice, saying that he could not trust him with Tason. After all, he could never become the same kind of leader as his brother Baek Do-kyung, who would not have allowed such an outrage. At this time, Chief Jang was sitting in one of the snack bars. He called his daughter, asking if she was studying well and eating well. She said that Dad was being too grumpy, when suddenly a familiar man approached him. It was Police Chief Won-ho. He said he knew a couple of good places he should write about, and asked why here. But Jang put his finger to his lips, telling him to be quiet, and he told his daughter on the phone that he would call back later. Won-ho thought that his daughter should have returned from studying abroad by now, so he must have talked to her. He asked if Jang had sorted out the general meeting, but he was in no hurry to answer, and he hadn't eaten much, so the news was not good. But Chief Jang said that, in any case, it was just a bunch of amateurs, and they were professionals. They both started eating, saying that very soon the One Sync project would be launched, and then no organization would be able to stop them. Jang added that this time, he had to meet the General Assembly in person, and Won-ho was surprised by his words. He said he felt that if he wanted to launch the One Sync project, he first needed to take control of the General Assembly. Besides, if the officials find out about this, then everything will go smoothly. After all, Baek Yi-soo and his comrades have already been dealt with. However, Jang said that it was not that simple, because if they directly put pressure on the gathering organizations, chaos would ensue. Choi Young-ho spoke on the phone with Lee Sung-min, saying that it was not such a big deal, and he felt like he was on vacation. But Sung-min still apologized, saying that he was sorry anyway, since Young-ho was currently being held hostage. However, the big man from Haack only smiled and asked if this decision was not made for the good of the organization. He said that was why everyone decided to trust and follow his decisions, even though the result was a bit awkward. They said goodbye, agreeing to meet sometime, and Sung-min said that he should get a good rest now. Chung-ho also hung up the phone, and Xion, who was sitting next to him, noticed that it was as if he was talking to his grandson, not his boss. He continued by saying that even though he was caught because of such a boss, he continues to trust him completely. Young-ho just shrugged, saying that he simply respected his boss. And as for being a hostage, it was his decision. But Xion asked, wasn't it the boss who told him to do this? After all, an order was an order, and now he was the one taking the rap for it. For some reason, Young-ho asked if Tason was really such an organization, because if that was really the case, then he was disappointed. Jin Woong repeated that Yi-soo should leave, but Yi-soo became angry, asking if he really thought he could give it first and then take it back. He had already said that he was using Tason for revenge, and at the moment, Haack was in their hands. But he said that the problem was not in his methods at all. First of all, he had to pretend to be Baek Do-kyung, because so far it was not visible. He said that if Baek Do-kyung were here, he wouldn't have done that because Tason was an organization that trusted him. And if Yi-soo wanted to be like his brother, then he should also show the organization this faith. Then he can replace Do-kyung. This belief, these methods. That is why Tason still participated in these childish games as a general assembly, as Yi-soo answered him. He said that the organization should simply obey the boss's orders, and as for his methods, he would simply use force. Hearing this, Jin-woong silently took off his jacket, and then said that since Yi-soo thought of it as childish fun, then let him handle it alone. Yi-soo didn't think for long. He jumped up from his place and rushed at the big guy, and then jumped, putting his knee out to strike, but Jin-woon was able to catch him. He grabbed Yi-soo by the shirt and threw him to the ground, so that he didn't even have time to grab onto anything and was knocked down. The big guy asked if that was all that intelligence could do, but before he could finish speaking, he was hit in the chin by a foot from Yi-soo. The blow was quite noticeable, and a characteristic maroon mark was left on Jin-woong's face, but he understood that Yi-soo was not going to retreat. Young-ho asked if it was an organization that obeyed only by force, who would follow it. They trust each other only with their fists and pride, and they fight wars only because they have united with other people. If you meet a person who will only do what he does, and a person who will stab you in the back, then among them, you can find another. Someone you want to believe in and follow, because it will seem to you that this path is the most correct. And Soo finally overpowered Jin-woon, swinging his arm to hit him, but he didn't get up and was now lying on the floor of the room, where everything was turned upside down. He let go of the big guy and turned to leave, saying in parting that he was wrong and the problem was not in his methods of solving problems. He said that their system did not necessarily have to be based on force, because if the organization decided everything by force, then it would already be an army. Shion's phone rang, and when he saw who was calling, he stood up and prepared to leave, telling Young-hong that he was interesting and that they would chat again sometime. He suddenly wondered if there was someone who couldn't trust anyone. Would that person try to put pressure on other people by force? Seeing Shion, whom he had summoned, Yi-soo said that from today on, they would establish their own organization. They will do this with the help of strong people who honestly do their job. He gave Shion a list of those to contact. He said that the deadline for this is 1 week, after which they will get rid of the general meeting and themselves become the strongest organization in Seoul. Jin-woong lay on the floor, feeling a little annoyed that he lost to Baek Yi-soo, even though he was the commander of the NAR Special Forces. He remembered how 4 years ago he worked in a butcher shop, and that was when he first met Baek Do-kyung. One day he came to him again, but Jin-woon was not happy with this man because it was clear from him that he was involved in dirty deeds. Do-kyung then said that if Jin-woong continued to be so unkind, he might soon lose his business. However, Jin-woong only told him that they had a smoking ban in the establishment, and then Do-kyung apologized, changing the subject. But he pointed to a couple of beaten men who were scattered around the diner, asking if they weren't his customers. But Jin-woon told him to stop it and get lost before he made any more noise, and then added that it was already late. But suddenly a man in a red suit appeared from behind the door and was very surprised to see Jin-woon. He said that he had heard many different rumors, but it was indeed Jin-woong, and then asked if he was really working here now. It was Lee Hung-gu, director of the Haack Ilsu organization, which was part of the Gorang group and dealt with loans and credits. He approached Do-kyung, saying that the boss didn't serve any bandits here, but he said that he was a regular customer. Hung-gu looked at him in surprise, asking what he just said. Had he really lost his fear? But Do-kyung's face was serious. Then Hung-gu walked up to him, took his face, because it seemed familiar to him, and asked if he was the one who attacked their guys from Haack. He asked how he dared to do that. He must have had an extra life in his pocket. However, Do-kyung wasn't going to play the victim and listen to his taunts. Now he asked how it was possible to call himself Haack. He took one of Hung-gu's hands and put a knife to his wrist, asking if he shouldn't be one-armed if he was in the Haack. A terrifying scream came from the diner, and the men from the Haack who had remained outside hurried inside. Hyung-gu cursed, asking how Do-kyung even dared to do something like that, since if Gorang found out about this, it would be bad for him. However, he asked in response why this should bother him since they were Tason, so he could run and cry to his Gorang. Members of the Haack burst into the establishment and rushed to take the boss, first going to the hospital because he had a severed finger. Jin-woong asked if he was just going to let them go like that, but Do-kyung said that he too had just sat and watched as those guys were beaten. He noticed that the store was very dusty and there wasn't even a menu, which meant that Jin Woong didn't plan on running a business. He said that he just wanted to get rid of the bandits, and he had just helped him with that, so wouldn't he like to join him now? Jin Woong asked if he even knew who his opponent was, but Do Kyung again said that they were Tason, so it didn't matter. Then Jin Woong handed him the rubber band on his fist, telling him to tie his hair with it because he looked like a butcher. Do Kyung thanked him, but said that he really had trouble doing business here. Now Jin Woong was looking again at the same elastic band that he now always wore for Mr. Beck. Now, however, there was no longer any need for this, because he was dead, and in his place came his younger brother, with whom he had just fought. He sighed, thinking about how different the twins were, but he liked Do Kyung's character better. Honggu sat in the chair and wanted to scratch his head, but again discovered that he was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. He cursed loudly, saying that he could never get used to it, remembering the one who did this to him. He couldn't forget the pain and humiliation of the last 4 years, so he decided that today was the day for revenge. He said that Tason left the general meeting and is now powerless, so today they will destroy Tason Group. The men who were part of the Gorang group unanimously supported the boss's idea, and their total number was 50 people. Suddenly, they heard someone knocking on the door, and they looked there, asking what it could be. But soon they found out for themselves because the door suddenly swung open, and they saw how an unfamiliar guy hit one of them. The rest stood in confusion, not understanding who dared to attack them at such a time, because they were part of the Gorang. But the man, whom they had at first taken for a boy because of his ridiculous hat, walked inside as if he was not afraid at all. He had bright blue eyes and pierced ears. He reached for his hat to take it off, and the men suddenly recognized him as Boris. Boris worked as an ordinary builder, and that day he was asked if he had seen who had done such a nasty thing. The head of the construction site pointed somewhere at the wall, asking who could have come up with such an absurdity. There was a huge graffiti painted on the wall in the form of a 5-pointed star, which was now displayed there. But Boris did not answer the main question. He looked away, for some reason thinking about something of his own. Meanwhile, Xian was clarifying some details from the biography of this man with Yisu. They were near the garages and were talking about him. Xian said that the man had a nickname, Shepherd, and asked if he hadn't returned to Russia. But Yisu replied in the negative, saying that he was hiding as a foreign worker and was here now. This was the first man on his list of people with whom he was going to create his own organization. His name was Boris. He was from the Russian mafia, a security inspector and the boss's hound, also known as Shepherd. He saw Yisu in the garages and lunged at him with a knife when he called his name. Xian was then doubtful whether such a person would want to work with them, because his nickname alone was already frightening. Yisu took out a flash drive and held it in front of the attacking Boris to attract his attention. It worked, and the man stopped with a knife to his throat, but Yisu said he had come to make a deal with him. He showed him the flash drive, and it was clear that the man understood a little of what was being discussed, so he took the knife from his throat. He took off his helmet, revealing his bald head, on which was a strange tattoo. On his head was a hole with red claws sticking out. The tattoo was called Demon in a Human Mask. It looked truly terrifying, and in this form, he appeared before Hyung-gu and the members of his organization. But Hyung-gu did not take him seriously, saying that such a hindrance was unacceptable on the day of the destruction of Tason. He ordered to deal with him. 2 men pounced on Boris, but he didn't even lift a finger, which surprised them a little. But they quickly realized where he got his confidence and power from, because he pointed the barrel of a pistol at the attackers. Of course, it was a real gun, because who needs fights if everything can be solved with a couple of shots? He struck with an incomprehensible side blow from the handle, but it was a powerful blow, and the man who took it instantly fell back. Another of the attackers stood in amazement. He still could not believe that they were facing an armed opponent. He decided to quickly take out a knife to attack the impudent man unnoticed, but he had already aimed at his head. He called them idiots, saying that no weapon would have time to damage him because he would send a bullet faster than that. For now he held back, and seeing that the man was distracted by his words, he hit him in the face with his free hand. The rest of the hook also rushed to the attack, saying that it would be better if they all attacked together. Some even managed to grab Boris by the arms, preventing him from taking proper aim and firing. Another one grabbed him in a chokehold, trying to squeeze his huge neck, but Boris didn't seem to care. Suddenly, he bit the hand of the one who was trying to strangle him, biting under his jacket and shirt with his teeth. Of course, the clothes prevented him from feeling the skin a little, but the man still felt something, and he really didn't like it. He swung his free hand to hit the insolent shooter, but he only gave him a strange look. In an instant, the man was on the ground, and Boris was standing over him. Now it was his turn to do the moves. He picked up the knife that had fallen from the other man's hand as he tried to get it, and turned to face his victim. With one hand he grabbed his face, and with the other he held the knife, holding it near the man's head, who was already losing consciousness. Suddenly he plunged the blade into his body, but the poor guy didn't even have time to scream as Hung-gu watched, overcome with horror. Raising his bloody gloved hand, he said that people raise demons to hide their weakness. Before Hung-gu could answer, Boris's hand was already on his head, and he was overcome with even greater horror. Boris squeezed the knife again, asking if there was a demon inside him, while his gaze was essentially like that of a demon. At that moment, Xion ran into the establishment, quickly finding Boris with his gaze and telling him to stop. He said that he did a good job, and the bald man seemed to listen to him, moving the knife away from Hung-gu. The boss of the Haack said that they were actually from Gorang, but Xion only said that everything was clear then, saying that they themselves were from Tason. Xion called Yisu, saying that the director of HK Kaital from Gorang Group had been captured, referring to Hyung-gu. He wondered if Tason was really that global, while Xion said that with Boris it really was easier. Speaking of simplicity, he told the commander that he knew about Boris's skills, but whether they would be able to control him, he was against it. But Yisu simply agreed that the man had good skills, adding that moreover, he would do anything for a fee. Now they spoke for another member of their potential organization, but Xion doubted him too, saying that such a capitalist would hardly suit them. Then the guy with the knife attacked Yisu, who came to talk about joining his organization. And Su managed to get his knife out, and this allowed him to defend himself. The one who attacked him asked what he was doing here, and who sent him. He was a North Korean spy, and he asked who he was and who sent him because he was very concerned about it. Lee Kyung-chun, 17, was a North Korean undercover agent, also known as Weasel, who was targeted by the NIA and was on the run. Suddenly, he took his knife, but only to transform it because it turned out to be a butterfly knife. Despite his young age, he was quite skilled in it, so Yisu had to dodge his attacks. He fought with all his might because the guy shouldn't be underestimated. Even though he was young, he was very capable. Suddenly, he managed to knock the knife out of Yisu's hand, and it flew a decent distance away. On top of that, the guy even managed to injure him. But Yisu only greeted him, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. It was obvious that the guy was surprised by this. He even asked again what he had said, because it turned out that he knew him. This young man had killed all of his colleagues and superiors when he fled to the south, so now he didn't understand how Yisu could know his name. His memories took him back 3 years to the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Then they gathered together, and the man in uniform introduced himself as Lee Woo-chang, a major in the General Intelligence Bureau. They were still very young, and he asked them if they knew where they were now and what kind of place it was. When he received no answer, he said it was a place where the North and South unite for profit, the Kaesong Industrial Complex. He said they create goods in North Korea and send them to South Korea to make a living. In short, doing dirty work. He asked if they understood what capitalism was, saying that those morons from the South didn't even take them seriously. There were many things done in the North, but what they did was not just a product of capitalism. They made people who could bite their necks like animals. That's how they raised them. In the eyes of each of these children, there was no compassion for a person, but only a killer instinct. Their special name was Laska. It was their duty and mission to protect their fatherland. The plan for training underage operatives was to work at the industrial complex during the day and train undercover agents at night. Kaesong was in close proximity to South Korea, so the children were sent along with the goods. But this plan had a drawback. He was called out by a man who called him by name, which was rare under their regime. In one hand, he held a box with something tasty inside, and in the other, he had a pack of the same treat. He placed the box in front of the boy, telling him to have a snack of this, since he was already working hard. He told him to eat slowly and not to forget to share with his friends, but the guy was already greedily chewing on the goodies. The taste of capitalism revealed by the Kaesong Industrial Complex tempted these children, especially Kyung-chun, who was quite poor. 2 years later, they were still training, their training only becoming more rigorous and brutal. The commanders who supervised them said it would take about 2 years to complete their ideological education. However, the chief commander said that everything should be finished this week. They had to get the guys into action by then. He explained that it was an order from above, although he personally did not like it either, but they had no choice. Kyung-chun asked the uncle if everything was okay with him, because he could tell from his face that something had happened. He put his hands out and the man remembered that he had promised him cookies, but asked him to wait a little since the goods would only be delivered to him in the evening. He still found one cookie, and he gave it to the lucky guy, but said that he would still have to wait until night. And at night, Kyung-chun was already performing another task. Still holding the cookie in his hand, tears involuntarily rolled down from his eyes. One of his comrades told him to hurry up and leave that cookie, because in South Korea, he would be able to eat them to his heart's content. They said that they first needed to take care of the driver, who turned out to be the man who gave Kyung-chun the cookies. Kyung-chun asked how they were going to take care of him, to which the boys asked if he really thought he was just giving them a ride. He protested, telling them to stop. There had to be another way, but the guy had already opened the door, saying they didn't have time for that. He asked what they were talking about, but before he could finish speaking, Kyung-chun slit his throat. He repeated that he had already said to give him some time, he would find another way, but the guy was already dead. The rest of his comrades looked at him with surprise and horror, and he asked them what had happened. They were silent, and now he began to worry, asking if they really didn't agree with him. He opened the driver's door, looking inside and addressing the uncle, who was still sleeping. He asked if he could give him a lift to South Korea, and he had such a genuine smile on his face that he couldn't resist. But, in fact, before that he had killed all his comrades, and now he alone was trying to move to the south, saying that it would suit him better. Major Lee Woo-chang approached the man, who begged him not to do it, even though he knew he was doomed. He asked why he did this to his comrades, since it was 3:30 and everyone, including the special instructor, were killed by Lee Kyung-chun. At 3:55, there was an intervention by a secret agent who infiltrated during Lee Kyung-chun's sudden actions. This agent turned out to be Baek Yi-soo, and Kyung-chun has since been called Weasel and has become the target of surveillance. At this point, his report ended, he cut the commander's throat, and another of his penetrations was successfully completed. Returning to the present, he pointed the butterfly knife at Kyung-chun's throat, praising his skills, saying that such things are only taught in North Korea. Then the guy raised his hands and said that it seemed that if he really was from the north, which he had no doubt, because he was able to take his knife. Yisu said that he had actually been following the guy for quite a long time, and he asked if he was going to kill him. He said that at that time it was very suspicious, so he asked what he wanted from him if he didn't come to kill. And Soo took out his favorite chocolate chip cookies, saying that he came to offer him a deal. Hearing about the deal, Kyung-chun took a cookie from him and his eyes lit up. He said that it was quite a capitalistic approach. Meanwhile, Tae-hyun was relaxing at the Gorang Group headquarters, Red Crown Hotel. Suddenly, he threw a bottle of expensive wine at the man who was reporting the situation, and he came with bad news. Tae-hyun asked again how it was possible that 3 hotels from their organization had already closed in just half a day. The speaker apologized and added that the district administration also said that nothing could be done. But Tae-hyun asked why they didn't find out everything themselves when they should have, and he grabbed the man by the ear. He asked why he needed such talentless members like them at all. But at that moment, another one of their Gorang group ran in. The man reported that Tason had attacked the crook lending business in Hanam-dong, and Tae-hyun realized who was behind it all. He ordered everyone to get ready, saying that they were going to go to Tason in Hanam-dong. They were walking down the corridor, but suddenly their attention was drawn to a guy who appeared out of nowhere and was now watching them. He mockingly asked if the men from Gorang really boasted that they were bandits, which, in his opinion, was a lie. Then Tae-hyun saw him, and his face twisted in displeasure because he recognized the ghost in this guy. He held one of the guards hostage and then said that he must have broken his arm, so he apologized. It was very disrespectful to Gorang Group and Tae-hyun, so he swung his knuckles at the insolent man. Even though he was a first-class killer, Tae-hyun couldn't allow his organization to be so brazenly humiliated. But the ghost only dodged the attack, which enraged him even more. But then another man appeared, apologizing to Tae-hyun. It was Chief Jang, he apologized, saying that his guys could be really unbearable, adding that he heard that Gorang had problems with her business. He said that if Tae-hyun listened to a few of his requests, they could help him with it. Then Tae-hyun realized that his hotels were closed because of them, not because of Tason, and he pushed back his chair, agreeing to talk. Still holding the knuckle duster in his hand, he asked if they were going to beg him for mercy. The ghost sitting opposite laughed, asking for forgiveness, because he could not get used to their gangster manner of communication. He said that at this rate, Tae-hyun would really run into trouble one day and pay with his life. He was about to stand up, asking how he dared to speak like that, but Jang stopped him, making a proposal. He told the director to calm down, saying that he was really not in a winning position. He explained that it was not he who should ask him for a favor, but he who should beg him for help, and his face changed. Everyone knows that the wolf is one of the strongest predators of the canine family. Of course, He is smaller than the same predators, such as a bear, a lion, or a tiger, but this did not bother him. Nevertheless, he was able to become the strongest, surpassing them all. After all, unlike other predators, he hunts and lives in a pack, and this is a huge advantage, in fact. They also have one individual who leads this pack, and such an individual is personified by charisma. Such an individual is called a leader. He was the main one in the pack, and the other members obeyed him, because he was the leader. The Gorang trading group could also be compared to a pod, and its name meant giant whale. And in Gorang, such a leader is Ryu Tai-hyun. He told Jang that he said funny things so that they, Gorang, would beg him for something. However, he only phlegmatically lit a cigarette, asking what Gorang had to do with it, which greatly puzzled Tae-hyun. Jang dug into his pocket, saying that their organization touched many areas of activity, from loans to the hotel business. But in the end, they are just pathetic bandits, aren't they? As he said this, he took a pistol out of his jacket. He said that, unfortunately, a hunter with a gun had come to the pack of wolves from Gorang, and he was now in front of them. There was already a special squad standing behind him, and Jang said that they were different from them, the amateurs, because they were professionals. But Taehyun's men also managed to gather behind him, and he said that, in that case, they should declare war. However, Chief Jang was not at all frightened by such statements. He repeated once again that Tae-hyun would calm down and listen to him. He said that it was time for them to get down to business, and with these words, he took out some folder with documents. He handed the folder to Tae-hyun, who glanced at its contents, but he clearly didn't like it. He studied the document carefully and then looked at his boss with contempt. He asked if he really thought he would fall for it, since it was all suspiciously tempting, and the document had the words, "one sink" on it. He asked why Jang offered them such a good project, because he knows that if they go down, it will definitely be together. However, the boss said that it was a business proposition, because they would provide them with a workforce that, he repeated, was a pro. But Tae-hyun said that he only talks about his professionals. He tore up his proposal. He added that they needed to be confident, that they could be trusted to do business, and he suggested looking at their abilities. Xian stood on the street and tried to call one person, but he didn't answer, and this worried him a little. He looked at the time and saw that their meeting should have started a long time ago, but he was still not there. He wrote to him asking where he had been hanging out, whether he had fallen asleep, since they had agreed to meet at that time, but there was no answer. Then he called the commander, asking what he should do now, since the one they were waiting for never showed up. Yisu, who was in another place, received the signal through the receiver in his ear, asking if it was heard. He told Xian to wait a little, because perhaps he would call him back. But for now, he, Yisu, was a little busy with Laska. Hearing about Weasel, Xian breathed out into the phone in surprise, asking if they had any problems along the way. He doubted whether the boy was useful at all, but he said so only because he did not know his abilities. He nimbly jumped up to two men who met them on the way and did not want to let them pass, and then took out his knife. Before they could even react, he had already cut their throats and was now deftly returning back to Yisu. He said with a smile that, to kill, you just need to put pressure on the settlement, and this was indeed true. Seeing this, Yisu responded positively to Xian, saying that this kid was useful and would still be useful to their organization. However, Xian asked if he was still too young for such serious matters, since the guy was only 17. But Yisu said that it was just right, asking in return if the person Xian was supposed to meet would be of any use to them. Suddenly, one of the bandits they had just managed to avoid, but as it turned out, not for long, attacked him. He swung the knife right next to his face, so Yisu barely managed to dodge it by moving slightly to the side. Then he grabbed the attacker by the arm, and the characteristic killer instinct appeared in his eyes. He broke the man's wrist, and he, screaming in pain, fell to the ground, while the others looked at them in surprise. But Xian continued to talk to him on the phone, telling him about the person he was supposed to meet. He said that while the commander was in North Korea, he was sent to the Middle East as part of the US Army, and he definitely didn't learn English there. He said that there, he met a group of rangers on motorcycles, but before continuing, he asked if the commander was listening to him. He said he had listened, and Xion continued, saying that among them, there was a capable man named Deadline. He said he was something like a gopher who would do anything he was asked to do as long as he was paid well. Yisu asked again if this was true, and Xion confirmed once again, saying that he was willing to do anything for money. Kyung Chun Yisu said that they had to keep moving, because today, they had to get rid of at least one more of Gorang's subsidiary organizations. So they made their first move by destroying their best and strongest subsidiaries. Xion said that he would start his operation and then join them when he finished, and the commander agreed. He had just finished talking when someone threw an axe in his direction, which almost reached his face. But Yisu grabbed the axe with a strong and dexterous movement and moved it to the side, protecting his face. He thought that it seemed like these people were faster than he thought, but that wasn't a problem for him and Kyung-chun. The man who threw the axe was very surprised that the boy was able to catch it, because he thought it would take him by surprise. It was Kim Do-hwan, the director of Doki Doki Night, an organization that was part of the Gorang group, who asked how they dared to attack Gorang. But Yisu only told Laska to deal with him because he was just an amateur, and he, with a cookie in his mouth, already rushed at the man. He missed it by literally a split second because two other men blocked their boss. One of them swung a knife and Kyung-chun dodged, but the blade passed near his mouth, cutting the cookie. This surprised the guy. He said that these guys, it turns out, are masters. It looks like they trained and studied in the army. He asked why the likes of them were on Gorang's side, and the men took a defensive stance. From behind them, Do-hwan's head appeared, bragging that these guys were sent here personally by director Ryu Tai-hyun. Well, plus, the same guys should have already arrived in their Tason, because they are not the only smart ones here, so he advised them to return to their headquarters. He said that they had better hurry before Tason was destroyed to pieces, but Yisu was in no hurry to leave his place. He thought that Chief Jang was directly involved with one sink, and now he dragged Gorang into it to increase his chances. Kyung-chun told him to leave those two masters to him because he would deal with them, and Yisu could deal with the director. The guy suddenly started jumping on his feet, saying that there was something that had been interesting to him for a long time, and now he wanted to check it out. He prepared for the attack, thinking that sure, he was a North Korean spy, but it should work on the South Korean masters too. With this thought, he rushed into the attack, already planning the probable actions for its success. The man he was running towards held out a knife to hurt the boy, but he hit him on the arm, pushing it to the side. Then he clamped it with his right hand, and in his left he was already twirling his knife, preparing to strike. It was clear that he would succeed, and so it happened, and the knife passed near the man's throat, who, in surprise, even dropped his weapon. Blood sprayed from his neck, and the other man was already clutching his knife because he realized that the guy in front of him was quite dangerous. He lunged at where Kyung-chun's head had been a second ago, but he ducked, covering himself with the wounded bandit's body. In an instant, he found himself next to another man, who, like his comrade, did not have time to do anything before he was cut. After finishing with them, the guy turned to Yisu, saying that the road was clear, so they should hurry. Yisu was about to help him with the rest, but the boy told him that he could handle it himself, and that he could go ahead. Yisu agreed. Du Huang, who was pressed against the wall, involuntarily thought how it happened that the elite defenders from the Gorang group were so easily defeated by some guy. Yisu thanked Kyung-chun and hurried to hide, because he still had things to do that he absolutely had to do. As he ran, he thought that Chief Jang was already with Gorang, and it happened quite quickly. Taehyun admitted that the boss's guys were not bad, but he asked if they would listen to amateurs like Gorang group. To this, Jang asked him a counter question, asking why he thought they were professionals. It was all quite obvious, because they simply wouldn't work unless they were paid properly. Therefore, it doesn't matter who orders them, the main thing is that there is decent pay. A guy on a motorcycle rushed towards Isu. In this case, this guy was a professional among professionals. He had already swung the crowbar that he held in his free hand. A large group of people had already gathered near the building, each of them armed with a bladed weapon. At the same time, a car drove up to them and stopped near the building. In the car sat Chief Jang and Ghost, the latter saying that he was still not used to the fact that they were involved in business groups. He said that he was sure that he had killed back Yisu, asking why he was still alive. But Jang told him that he should have been convinced of his death and brought the corpse. Then, there would definitely be no doubt. He said that if the ghost had done that, none of this would be happening now, but nothing could be changed. The ghost had a strange expression on his face when he heard these words. For some reason, he looked into the distance for a while without even blinking. Then he seemed to come out of his trance, slamming his fist into his palm, asking why he hadn't actually done that. Suddenly he laughed, and his eyes seemed to be about to pop out of his eyeballs. He said that he should have done exactly as the boss said. Seeing that he had already gone crazy, Jang said that they should no longer return to the past, so there was no need to think about it. Meanwhile, the guy gripped the crowbar even tighter and prepared to strike, swinging it with all his strength. Considering that he was on a motorcycle and at high speed, the skill of his strike was surprising, because if it weren't for Yisu's knife, he would have already been unconscious. The guy used a crowbar to stop. Now Yisu clearly recognized him as Deadline, but he doubted that Shion could talk to him so quickly. It suddenly occurred to him that if it wasn't Xion, then Chief Zhang had already beaten them to it and hired this guy. However, he didn't have time to think about it, because new changes had occurred, and the situation had become much worse. The Middle East, Afghanistan, is considered the most dangerous war zone that can be found in the desert. There was vast wilderness and sand dunes everywhere here. So to overcome these conditions, the 66th Ranger Battalion created a special task force that rode motorcycles. It was called a Special Group, and it was created by the U.S. Special Operations Command, USSO. One of the Rangers was transmitting a signal calling headquarters. He said that they had managed to recover several enemy guns and gunpowder. The problem was, however, that even in those days, there were variables. It was always like this. Such people did not think that they were betraying anyone. They were simply worried about their own safety. Therefore, in order to survive in the midst of these variables, it is necessary to find a reliable way, a method that can ensure their safety without any risks or damage to them. War always means the death of thousands of people, perhaps the most absurd thing that humanity has come up with in its history. For example, a group of extremists seeking to advance their interests through a series of riots, or greedy corporations looking to exploit these interests to achieve their own goals. There were many more examples that could have been given, but something else was absolutely clear. This lifestyle was precarious, because people by their nature will always strive to gain more power into their own hands, taking care of their own safety. In this world, the strong will always rule over the weak. It was, is, and will be so. So there is no point in changing anything. It was a very dangerous war zone, where you never knew what you would be greeted with or what you would be sent away with. And if you couldn't cope with all the variables, your end was as inevitable as the natural cycle. You became a victim in this system. You were eaten by someone who was stronger, and you could no longer do anything about it. Power and authority are not given to everyone. So if someone wanted to get them, he had to go through a rather thorny path. However, if he managed to overcome it, he became the winner and received the power and knowledge necessary to dominate this world. Sometimes people underestimate others, thinking that they are fools who are not able to think like them. However, when these fools returned, their appearance was as unexpected as the delusions about their failure. And then comes the hour of reckoning. That's when it becomes clear who is truly the strongest and smartest. It was a simple principle, which, however, for some reason everyone forgot. If you underestimate your enemy, you will pay. It is precisely in such a place, the desert, where not everyone can survive and ensure their safety. The most terrible of the predators was Deadline, who managed to subjugate not only his comrades, but also the enemy. This was a brief description of what Xion had said about him, saying that the guy was feared by everyone without exception. The roar of his motorcycle could be recognized with your eyes closed, because there was something frightening and terrible about it. It was impossible to hide or run away from him. The victim could only accept the fight, the outcome of which determined her life. Now, such a victim was Yisu. He knew that meeting with Deadline was dangerous, but Deadline found him first. He was preparing to attack again, gripping the crowbar tighter and adjusting something on his motorcycle. His left hand, holding the crowbar, was aimed at the enemy's weak points. But unfortunately, Yisu realized this too late. Suddenly, the light emitted by the motorcycle's headlights went out, leaving the two of them alone in almost impenetrable darkness. However, it turned out that the advantage was still on the enemy's side, and Yisu thought that he most likely had adaptation to the darkness. He realized that Deadline had used a clever tactic, first shining the bright headlights on him, and then dimming the lights so that Yisu's vision would become blurry. Suddenly, quiet steps were heard somewhere near him, and only thanks to this, he managed to wave his knife in that direction and defend himself from the blow. The only problem was that Deadline was hitting with a crowbar, and this, as we know, is a pretty strong piece of metal. During the attack with the knife, a piece of the blade broke off and flew off to the side, making his weapon of little use now. Moreover, he did not have time to tense his hand in time, so now it hurt a lot from the unexpected tension. Things were getting tense. He didn't know if he would be able to block the enemy's next attacks, so he had to do something about it. Deadline had judged him on how he had been able to defend himself at the last second, but now he was about to attack again. Meanwhile, in the main office, and at the same time the headquarters of Tason, a battle was also raging between the two organizations. The men of Tason continued to fight, telling each other not to retreat and to hold the line, defending their organization. But the people from Gorang kept coming and coming, not giving them time to rest and gather their strength. The worst part was that the attack happened just when they couldn't get in touch with the principal. The men were cutting each other up, waving knives, when suddenly a strange guy in glasses stepped into the arena. He had a strong build and said he didn't understand Chief Jang, asking what was wrong with those thugs. They continued to fight, supporting each other not to give up, because that would be the end for the Tason group. But suddenly the bespectacled man attacked one of the men, who was fighting hard and encouraging his comrades. The blow was so strong that he even lost his knife. That's how hard they hit him in the jaw. He fell to the floor, unable to stay on his feet, but he did not lose consciousness and now simply looked furiously at the new bandit. He looked back at him, saying that they were beyond their capabilities because they were professionals in their field, and those were just a bunch of scum. As if to confirm his words, the men behind him rushed to attack the remaining members of Tason. The bespectacled man ordered them to kill all these idiots, but suddenly there was a loud bang, as if someone had been thrown to the floor. This turned out to be almost true, as Choi Jung-ho joined the fight and unleashed a heavy blow on one of the Gorang. He sighed in annoyance, saying that he just wanted to enjoy his vacation here, but these idiots had gotten in the way. Putting on gloves with metal inserts, he said that since this was the case, he simply could not help but help. The men of Gorang recognized him. He was one of Ilhak's 9 knives, and therefore incredibly strong. They asked each other what he was doing there. The bespectacled man noticed that his men had involuntarily begun to retreat, and he decided to take a look at what had frightened them so much. Jung-ho also saw the unfamiliar guy, saying that he didn't look like someone from their business. He added that he was sorry that their meeting took place under such circumstances because the guy looked capable. However, today, he, Jung-ho, the deputy head of Gudo, the second knife, was on Tason's side and fighting alongside its members. With these words, he took off his white jacket and now wore a black shirt, indicating his temporary status in Tason as the head of security. But the guy just chuckled smugly, taking off his glasses. He asked if he wasn't too old for such games. The guy's name was Park Chang-hoon. He was the head of a special forces group and was dishonorably discharged for violence and rebellion. In the past, Seoul's most powerful organization, he was a member of it as one of the 9 knives. In that glorious era, he was Ilhak's main weapon, because his strength was known to everyone. He was the pride of the 9 knives, a man with great potential and his own convictions that were built on moral ambushes. Now this man is fighting on the side of Tason, who in the past was one of the organizations that did not dare to oppose him. The boys from Gorang also could not understand this, but they were overcome with fear and panic because the old man was very dangerous. Then Chang-hung turned to him and said that since those fools did not dare to engage in battle with him, he would do it. Jung-ho, however, said that he almost managed to hurt him, but the guy still lacked good manners. However, he jumped to conclusions, and Chang-hong added more strength. Breaking through his block, he knocked out the big guy. He then took a stance and began to throw various punches, which slightly confused Jung-ho. Then he stepped back for a second, but only to get a running start, and in the blink of an eye, he was already running towards the old man. He hit him in the stomach, but to his surprise, the big guy was still quite old, because he completely absorbed his blow. But then Chang-hoon didn't realize it because Jung-ho bent over, pretending that the blow had hit him, so that the boy would lean towards him. But at the last moment, Chang-hong noticed this, and without thinking twice, hit him on the head, ruining the plan to capture himself. Meanwhile, Deadline was already sitting on his motorcycle again, the wheels of which were spinning in place, creating clouds of dust. And Sue wondered if he had broken his arm. He needed to hurry. Everything was taking too long. Deadline placed his hand on the handle of the motorcycle, preparing to attack Yi-soo again. This time he was sure that he wouldn't dodge. The motorcycle roared, and he rode straight towards the commander, who, however, remained calm and did not even move from his place. Deadline lifted the bike onto one wheel. It was a direct attack at speed, which meant you had to aim towards the body to defend yourself. He ducked, shortening himself from the front wheel, and managed to push the motorcycle a little so that the guy almost flew out of the saddle. But the next second, he launched an attack with a crowbar and then managed to stay in the saddle and ride through Yi-soo. The commander was lucky this time. He remained unharmed, although the attack was very close. However, Deadline had already turned his motorcycle around and was racing towards him again. He was intent on finishing off his victim, as he always had before. The wheels created clouds of dust that obscured Yi-soo's view, and the motorcyclist's hand was already raised for another blow. Suddenly, at the last moment, he shifted his weight onto the front wheel and turned the bike around, maintaining speed. This time, Yi-soo only managed to move his leg away from the place where the wheel would have crushed it, and he leaned back a little. Then Deadline swung his crowbar. The speed of his attack added by the fact that he was swinging from top to bottom while sitting in the saddle of his bike. Of course, Yi-soo couldn't miss such an attack. He dodged it, but it turned out that it was just a feint. Deadline forced him to duck to the side so he could get under the rear wheel of a motorcycle, and then he hit him with that wheel. Even Yisu's cap flew off and blood appeared on his face, because this was the first time the guy managed to touch him, which meant he was really capable. Yisu thought that all his judgments and predictions were wrong. Chief Jang, Gorang Group, and now this Deadline. Yisu needed to be more cool-headed and insightful. He needed to observe the enemy and look for his weaknesses. But for now, Deadline continued to attack, once again starting the motorcycle engine. He prepared to attack again, but it was impossible to tell or understand what weak points there might be. But Yisu still tried to assess the situation, as he had been taught in training, and he realized that his rear tire was smoking due to friction. The smoke now completely obscured the view, but not for Deadline, who seemed to feel confident with such visibility. Yisu no longer had a knife, so he took a stance, thinking about where the next attack would be, since his wound was on the right. Variables are called variables because they cannot be predicted or calculated. However, not all variables change the situation for the worse, because it happens that help comes unexpectedly. He heard a familiar voice asking if these were the methods of professionals, since Yisu wasn't as cool as he thought back then. Yisu was surprised to see Jin Wung take off his jacket and walk towards him, covering him with his large body. He asked if an amateur like him could join them, and that was another variable. Meanwhile, in Tason, an equally interesting fight was planned between an amateur and a professional. Park Chung-hoon was stretching his stiff neck, and the men from Daesan looked on in surprise and a little fear as he hit Jung-ho. The boy turned to him, asking the old man if he was still alive, since the difference in their strength could have been fatal for him. But, to his surprise, the big guy remained standing on his feet, and it even seemed that he was now even more terrible than before. This made Chung-hong hurry up, as he didn't understand how such a bandit could have such a physical form. He thought that he needed to finish him off quickly, but at that very moment, Jung-ho's fist was near his face. He managed to dodge, but was amazed by his speed and reflexes at that age, because the blow could have been decisive for him. Such a fast attack was not in keeping with his size, so Chung-hong realized that he had to increase the distance between them. He jumped away from the thug, but the latter attacked him again, saying that he had been in a terrible mood lately, because bastards like them tried to interfere in the affairs of their gangs. With these words, he plunged his fist straight into Chung-hong's stomach. He became noticeably nervous, because it seemed that the old man's patience had snapped, and now he was about to let off steam. He lunged at him again, and this time Chung-hong had to defend himself. He pulled out a knife, pointing it at the old man. However, this did not even bother him. He ignored the knife, hitting the guy in the face with all his might, so that the knife fell out and blood appeared. However, that was not the end. He watched in horror as the big guy grabbed his face as if he wanted to break his jaw. Chung-hoon bent over from the severe pain in his stomach. His face also hurt, and Jung-ho, who was holding him, asked if he understood everything. He continued to squeeze his face, asking if he really thought he could do anything to them. He started talking about Il-hak's former strength again, but Chung-hong grabbed another knife with his last strength, intending to cut his hand. However, Jung-ho naturally saw this and took the knife with his free hand, saying that the guy turned out to not be very smart. The big guy pulled his knife away and even squeezed it a little. Then Chang-hong noticed with horror that he was wearing Kevlar gloves. The material was very durable and was used for bulletproof vests, and Yang-ho only squeezed his face tighter. He threw the boy to the floor, following his fall until he hit his face, blood spraying everywhere again. He didn't get up from lying on the floor anymore, and Jung-ho said that it would be better for such professionals not to show themselves at all. He asked how he found the fight and whether it was as easy as he said at the beginning, since he was now lying on the floor unconscious. Meanwhile, Yisu's battle was just beginning, this time with reinforcements in the form of Jin Wung. The big man from Daesan, noticing that he was holding his hand, asked if he had bruised it or broken it, which would have been even worse. However, the commander said he was fine, saying that Tason was more important. But Jin Wung replied that there was no need to worry. After all, Tason was in good hands now, so they should also try. He rolled up his sleeves. Yisu said that the guy in front of them was a real pro, but Jin Wung interrupted him, saying that he was already tired of listening to this record. But he decided to explain later, because now he needed to deal with this impudent motorcyclist. Yisu immediately warned him, saying that it was dangerous to rush at him recklessly. But Jin Wung replied that he was thinking too much. He wrapped his jacket around his hand, saying he should try to hit at least once first. Deadline didn't seem at all embarrassed by the appearance of another man, because this was just another victim. He rushed towards them again. Jin Woong only dug his heels in further, saying that Mr. Beck Do-kyung said so. The motorcycle was rapidly approaching. They were preparing to hit each other, one with a crowbar and the other with a fist. He thought back to that meeting at the diner when Do-kyung had first said those words, and now he completely shared them. He prepared to attack, swinging his wrapped fist and gathering all his strength for this blow. It hit the motorcycle right in the center of the body, and the impact was so strong that the bike stopped. Deadline clearly didn't expect such power from the new victim. It even made him fly out of the saddle. He managed to group himself in time and land near the motorcycle, whose wheels continued to spin. But Jin Woon didn't give him time to recover and swung his crushing blow again. This time he hit his opponent, who flew back and dropped the crowbar. So now the advantage was on the side of Yi-soo and Jin Woong. The latter approached the director, saying that someday, solving the problem using Baek Do-kyung's method could make him a real Baek Do-kyung. Yi-soo looked at him with surprise, although he understood what he was trying to tell him, remembering his brother. Jin Woon also knew that the director understood everything perfectly, but he still wanted to remind him of it. If you think about it, it all started back in his childhood. When Yi-soo was 11 years old, he remembered how he cried then. His brother Do-kyung was always different from him in that he never cried, unlike little Yi-soo. Then he asked if he hadn't told him that he would beat him up if he cried again, all because the 6th grade boys were bullying him. Although he and his brother were twins in the same age, his older brother was very different from him, the weakling. He was stronger than the other guys and even beat guys who were older and taller than him. He simply had no fear. And he, as a younger brother, did not like this at all, because in comparison with him, he was nobody. His brother had defeated all the bullies who bullied Yi-soo, and although it was the right thing to do, Yi-soo felt like he was losing to him in every way. Nothing changed when they entered school, and literally the next day, Do-kyung started another fight. They were in the same class, but Yi-soo was more focused on his studies, while his brother kept getting himself into trouble. They were 15 years old then. Their views on life were already very different, but they still worried about each other. The onlookers from his class were glued to the windows, watching his brother because he always fought bravely until the last. They saw other guys who had something broken or bandaged, and then they all noticed Baek Do-kyung. Over the course of 4 years, he became even stronger, and even then, his image had something to do with the ability to gather people around him. He stood in front of other guys who, apparently, were going to confront him and his guys. Suddenly, another guy appeared and asked why only 3 of them came, because now they made him look like a hooligan. He was a high school student, and he clearly knew how to fight well, and he was now heading straight for Do-kyung. One of those who watched the scene from the classroom said that it must be a martial artist. He really did have a well-trained body. He was already on par with Do-kyung and was a head taller than him. He said that he gave his friends advice, but apparently the guys didn't listen to him and paid the price. However, Do-kyung was not affected by this at all. He called the boy by name, asking if he hadn't graduated from high school yet. He asked again why the hell he came here then. Did he really not learn anything after graduation? His last words were to tell them to follow him, as he didn't want to start a fight in the middle of the school. Everyone who was near them at that moment watched their conversation with surprise, but no one intervened. One of the guys who was on Do-kyung's side and who had already been beaten up by that senior once wanted to go too. But Do-kyung raised his hand, stopping him, saying that he would go alone, and besides, in this state, the guy would only get in the way. At that moment, Yi-soo approached the window, also curious about who his brother was going to fight this time. They walked behind the school so no one saw Do-kyung suddenly kneel down, his head bowed to the ground. He apologized to the senior student, saying that he had acted thoughtlessly under the influence of the atmosphere. The guy didn't expect such a turn of events, because he was already prepared to have a good fight with this impudent fellow. But Do-kyung continued, saying that he respected him so much and that he heard that he went to Jaewon High School, where he probably kept everyone in fear as well. The guy was a little perplexed because he certainly didn't expect compliments, especially from this kid. But in the end, he liked his humility. He said that at first he thought of making a cripple out of him, but now he changed his mind. He said that Do-kyung made him laugh, so he would leave him alive and hurt his friends instead. He asked the guy how he felt about this deal, but Do-kyung was already looking at him completely differently and stopped bowing. Clenching his pen in his fist, he replied that this wouldn't do, and that he should have hit the high school student in the head once. The guy naturally didn't understand what he was talking about, but the next moment Do-kyung jumped on his foot, sticking his pen into his boot. It felt like a nail had gone through his leg, and he screamed in pain, clutching at it. Meanwhile, Do-kyung took advantage of his lack of concentration and kicked him in the face. He said that his classmate Ji-hoon delivered newspapers every morning. And at first Do-kyung, laughed because it was terribly old-fashioned. But one day, this high school boy beat him up for the same reason. And now he was angry because Ji-hoon was a good guy. One of those who came to watch their leader fight attacked him, asking what kind of nonsense he was just telling. Do-kyung caught his punch with a bent elbow and asked if the seniors were having too much fun lately. He added that each of them probably had brothers and sisters who also went to primary school, so why didn't that stop them? Why did they still continue to bully those who were weaker and younger? He pressed on the sore spot, and the boy fell down holding his arm, while the others also pounced on Do-kyung. Two of them grabbed him under the arms, and the third swung to hit him. However, even in this position, Do-kyung was able to dodge, throwing his head back as far as possible, and with his free hand, he was already reaching out to the guy. He grabbed him by the hair, saying that he remembered something and forgot to tell him earlier. One of those holding him was surprised that he could still move, because that meant he was stronger. He hit the guy he was holding in the face with his head, but that hurt him too. He was still being held, and the boys decided to attack together since he didn't have a chance against a combined attack. But Do-kyung, instead of answering, showed them the middle finger, saying that if they touched him or his friends again, they were dead. And Soo hated his brother, who ran ahead and did not look where he was going, hated him for the actions he committed. But he also regretted the decisions he himself had not made, and there were quite a few of them. That is why he then came to his brother's aid, just as he had once helped him. Yisu envied his brother and wanted to become like him, not in appearance but in character, because his was much better. After all, they were brothers, so no matter what difficulties were on their way, together they could always overcome them. Do-kyung then asked him what he was doing here, to which Yisu responded in a slightly strange way. He showed him his fists, saying that he was always studying so damn much, but still couldn't understand anything. Do-kyung understood everything and also put out his fist, after which they dealt with the older guys together. As they were leaving, Do-kyung asked what Yisu wanted to be when he graduated, but he said he didn't know yet. And now he already knew for sure, because in fact he had answered this question a long time ago. He wanted to become like Baek Do-kyung, his brother. The deadline was lying on the ground. The motorcycle was lying to the side. The same was with the crowbar, which meant that victory was Tason's. But Yisu continued to think about his brother. He thought that little by little he was beginning to be like him. However, this was not the case. They were completely different people, even though they looked similar to each other. He said he never knew what his brother was really like, even though he lived side by side with him for almost his entire life. It seemed to him that he could never become like him, no matter how hard he tried, and no matter what efforts he made. Then Jin-woon approached him and said that he could help in this matter. He said that he would tell him what kind of person Baek Do-kyung really was. He then knelt before Yi-soo, saying that he would personally raise him to the pedestal where his brother once shone. Jong-ho clapped his gloves to shake off the mixture of blood and dust from the fight with the Gorang thugs. He put one hand behind the other elbow, doing warm-ups and saying that he had had enough of these fights. It was time to retire. But then he remembered his director from Haack, who would lose the main weapon of his organization if he left. He wondered whether it was worth making such a radical decision, since it was still too early for him to retire. He then turned to the men who were still left, telling them to hurry up, as he still had things to do. He said they were so young but so slow, but at that moment the ghost appeared behind him. Meanwhile, Deadline had also recovered from Jin-woong's blow, which was quite a clear indication of his strength. He walked over to the motorcycle, preparing to get back on the saddle, and Jin-woong gave him credit, saying that he was a tough nut to crack. He asked Yi-soo who this guy was, but the commander didn't know anything about him either, except that he served in the US Army. Their conversation was interrupted by Deadline himself, who pointed to the broken glass of his headlight, asking what the big guy was going to do with it now. But the big guy was more surprised by the fact that the guy spoke Korean, because he didn't even have a particular accent. Hearing no answer to his question, he twisted the crowbar like the butterfly knife that Kyung-chun had. He was already back on his motorcycle, preparing to run into them again, this time carrying out an attack. However, Jin-woon only moved a little away from the place where he had flown into last time, and once again firmly planted his feet on the ground. He clenched his fist and said that since that was the case, he didn't have to hold back. He hadn't fought in such a state for a long time. Deadline was about to step on the gas when he suddenly heard the phone vibrate in the side pocket of his jacket. This made him stop, and although his eyes were hidden behind the helmet, they widened a little. He had an old push-button phone, but it was enough for him. The vibration meant a new text message, and he opened the message. It stated that the Gorang organization had transferred 20,000 won as a down payment to his account, and the rest would come when he completed the task. Below, he was given the necessary address, and he started his motorcycle to begin carrying out his new task. He turned the motorcycle around, and Yi Su and Jin Woong stood there, watching in surprise as their opponent left the battlefield. Finally, Deadline pointed his finger at Jin Woong, saying that he remembered the bastard who broke the headlight. With these words, the motorcycle roared, and Deadline, looking at them one last time, rode away. Jin Woong said that he thought he would fight after such words. But Yi Su replied that his work here was probably already over. Or there was another reason. He received a bigger order, because the one who paid more ruled over people like him. Meanwhile, silence fell over the main office of Tason as a battle broke out between Second Knife Choi Jung-ho and the ghost assassin. The rest of the men simply watched in silence as they fought, neither Gorang nor Tason daring to intervene in their battle. Everyone had different experiences in the organization, but it was rare to see such a battle. Even the most experienced agents understood this, including Jang Soo-bin, who even postponed his vacation. There were traces of blood from various men on Jung-ho's glove, and now he was about to leave the mark of another professional on it. He delivered a powerful uppercut to the ghost, and it seemed like he wouldn't get up after that. But the old man found this guy strange and alarming, because he swung the knife masterfully, even managing to hit him a couple of times. To finish him off, it was necessary to choose the right moment and finish everything in one fell swoop. However, the ghost had his own opinion on this matter. He looked at him with his furious gaze, saying that Grandpa would not defeat him like that. Seeing his face, Jin Woon tensed up, because the guy didn't show any fear at all, and this was alarming. He managed to notice how the enemy transferred his weight to his left leg, which meant that he was preparing to attack. This is what allowed him to put his hands out to protect himself, which saved him from damage to his internal organs. The enemy's speed was astounding, and Jung-ho barely managed to avoid the fatal blow, but his glove was cut. He began to analyze the enemy because as soon as he prepared to reflect his attack, he changed its trajectory. Now he realized that he had underestimated the guy, and now it was not about protection that he should worry about. In front of him stood a real killer, who was a master of the knife, and who also seemed to have mental problems. As if to confirm this, the ghost suddenly burst out laughing, saying that Baek Yi-su was looking at him with the same face. Chung-ho swung again, but the blow missed. The guy moved incredibly fast, not allowing himself to be caught. He went behind the old man, saying that this wouldn't do and that he needed to move faster if he wanted to get him. He pounced on him from behind, spinning his kirambit for a fatal attack, intending to finish the big guy off. But Jung-ho put out his hand, catching his knife, even though it was incredibly sharp and easily cut even the special material. But the man believed that he would not break, as long as he protected something important. He hit his opponent again. However, the ghost grabbed his arm by the elbow, looking at him in bewilderment, saying that Grandpa was pathetic if this was all he could do. Suddenly, he threw his head back, still laughing, and pressed on the joint of his arm, almost breaking the bone. Jung-ho felt it clearly, but he no longer had the strength to do anything to free himself. The ghost attacked again, this time jumping at him, knee out to strike him in the head. However, at the last second, a signal sounded for all employees to retreat, and this forced him to stop. He asked why they were retreating now when Tason was almost defeated, but the signal only repeated itself once more. Those who remained from Gorang began to retreat little by little, and only the ghost remained in place. Chang-hong approached him, saying that the thugs from the top of Gorang had changed their plans, so there was an order to retreat. He said it seemed like it was part of a new plan and they seemed to have a role to play too. But the ghost was not satisfied with this explanation. He grabbed Chang-hong by the hair, asking if they would really obey the government. He said he was playing with fire, shifting from side to side between his rulers. He snatched the radio from his pocket, telling the man on the other end that the fun was just beginning and this time, he had to finish off Tason. But the chief told him to stop fooling around and follow the order to retreat. Jang explained that their all-powerful CEO, Tae-hyun, claimed to have some idea. It was already dawn when Yi-su and Jin Woong arrived at Tason's office, and they immediately saw traces of a fight outside the building. Jin Woong saw Jung-ho's bandaged arm and ran up to him, asking who could have caused him such damage. Tae-hyun told Chief Jang his idea, saying that in such cases, one must act harshly. Laska had no luck tying his tie, so he kept chewing on his cookie, asking Shion for help with this accessory. He just sighed loudly, telling the guy to come to him. And he thought to himself that, apparently, they didn't teach this in North Korea. The guy came up to me and said he had never worn a suit before, because his signature accessory was his signature butterfly knife. While Shion was tying his tie, Boris walked over to the table picking up a large bread knife, and Shion had to stop him too. All in all, the guy had to keep an eye on every new member of their organization, and it was tiring. Jin Woong and Young Ho didn't help him much with this, so all responsibility for order in the group fell on him. But it was not always like this, because when the director came, order was restored by itself, and that was the case this time. Yisu entered the room with Sue. They were also in full dress, and he was pleased with the general mood. He suggested that from now on they talk like real bandits, because now they were also bandits. He sat down in a chair, spreading his legs just as his brother did when he started the conversation, and asked what would be the best way to begin. Young Ho stood by the car, asking if Jin Woong was really going to send him away like that after everything he had done for them. To which Jin Woong replied that he didn't chase him away, because he could have left at any time. But Jung Ho said that he was just joking, and already wanted to come back himself. Then Jin Woong decided to ask him if he wanted to stay in Tason a little longer, at least for the period of his recovery. But he only put his hand on his shoulder, saying that he understood what he was getting at, but he still couldn't do that. He said that he actually realized something when he saw how Tason had transformed, and that was just the beginning. Watching the new members and how their organization now worked, he began to think about his own. He said that this was not the end, and one day Haack too would rise from his knees, returning to his former glory. That's why he had to come back, and after saying that, he smiled, saying that his vacation was over. Now it was time to return home to his organization, where the guys were probably already waiting for him. At the Nine Knives headquarters, the battle had also ended, and now Hyunim was kneeling, unable to continue it. He asked those who attacked them if they really thought that Haack would surrender so easily, since they were the best of the best. However, so far everything indicated the opposite, because all of Gudo's members lay defeated on the floor. Only Hyunim remained, perplexed, asking who had sent them, since they had dealt with Gudo, meaning they were very strong. It was Ghost and Deadline, and destroying Hack's trump card was their new mission. They were about to leave when suddenly they were pushed aside by Tae-hyun, who also came to the scene to see everything with his own eyes. He turned to Hyunim, saying that he had aged quite a bit since their last meeting, and now looked like an old man. It all started with Shung Min sitting in his office, calculating the revenue for the last month, which turned out to be small. He said there were more in the last month, and Hyungnim, who gave him the report, apologized. But the director said that he shouldn't have, because it was his fault too. But what was more important was how they felt. One of them had a broken arm, the other a broken leg, but neither of them complained much about their injuries. The man with the broken leg, on top of everything else, was suddenly seized by a cramp and grabbed his leg. Sunmin said that they had all worked hard, and as someone who couldn't fight at all, he was glad that they were still alive. He was still speaking when suddenly some strange sounds were heard, and one of the knives suggested going and checking out the situation. When he asked the guards what the sound was, they replied that it sounded like a motorcycle, even though they were on the third floor. The sound came from the landing, where the guards looked in surprise at the unexpected guest. Of course, it was Deadline who rushed towards them on his motorcycle, and in the blink of an eye, the men were already lying on the ground. The others, who had come to see what all the noise was about, now also looked at the motorcyclist with horror. But he didn't waste any time and knocked down the doors to Hack's main office, where the headquarters of the Knives was located, with the front wheel. They watched in amazement as the door fragments flew in all directions, unable to do anything. Deadline drove into the room at high speed, waving his crowbar in all directions, and Borscht was overcome with fear. Because of this, they could not move, continuing to stand in place, and the next moment one of them had his face cut by a crowbar. The poor guy even threw his head back. Blood spurted from his mouth, but he, like the others, did not think of retreating. The Knives were not caught off guard after all. They had been through countless battles, just like professional boxers who are always ready for anything. They had no doubts about their duty. Using their experience and skills, they boldly engage in combat with any enemy to protect their organization. However, in this case, a previously unseen enemy entered the ring, whose appearance they could not have predicted. He was like a knight on horseback, all in heavy armor, against their fists and pride. This discovery left the Knives slightly at a loss, as they had never fought such an opponent before, and this allowed Deadline to discover their weak spot, where he directed all his subsequent attacks. A metal crowbar against a human bone is like a knight's sword against a boxer's fists. Even though they were professionals, they couldn't fight against something like that, especially since they had injuries from the previous battle. And after Deadline came other members of the Gorang group, who were also supposed to participate in the destruction of Gudo. Now it was no longer a fair fight, because the enemy was superior in numbers and was armed. The knives saw the Gorang organization badge on the men's jacket and told them to hold their horses. Hyun Nim shouted that in that case, it was a direct violation of their agreement, asking if they really wanted to turn the entire committee against them. But the men didn't seem to understand what he was talking about. One of them gave the order to deal with this old fool. With all their strength, all the knives fought for their organization, forgetting about past injuries and wounds. Choi Kwang Pal, the seventh knife, was furious, asking who these freaks dared to bare their teeth at. However, his leg was dislocated, and Hyun Nim saw that it had not yet healed, which meant that they would not be able to fight for long. Guan Pal was a pretty strong knife, but in his current state, he couldn't fight to his full potential. So Hyun Nim decided to take on the guy on the bike. It was the least he could do, and Deadline had already lifted the wheel, intending to run it over the head of one of the knives. The man's name was Sunman, and Hyun Nim managed to pull him away at the last moment, avoiding being hit by the wheel. He told him to protect the master, and he himself would detain these bandits. But Songmin replied that he could not handle it alone. Then the man named Jan Tok Bae, Il-Hack's eighth knife, who Deadline had first knocked out, suddenly stood up again, saying that he would help too. He said that together with Hyun Nim, they could teach that motorcycle-riding idiot a lesson. This surprised Deadline a little, who clearly didn't expect him to get up after being hit on the head with a crowbar. He was distracted by it, which gave Hyun Nim the opportunity to attack him when he was defenseless. He told director Lee Sung-min not to worry about them and to escape, because it was dangerous here and they wouldn't be able to hold them off for long. Guanpao fought with the rest of the Gorang members who arrived as reinforcements, and so far he was doing a good job of stopping them. Sunman said he was counting on him, leading the director out of the room, who protested, saying he didn't want them to be finished off here. But Guanpao told him not to worry, he would catch up with them later. After all, they were Il-Hack's 9 knives. Sunman walked out to the car with the director and opened the doors, telling him to get in, but he was still leaning on it, saying that they should help the others. But Sunman replied that Gorang had begun to act, so they were now in danger, and it would be best to retreat. Director Lee protested again, saying that there was no retreat, but he interrupted him, saying that if he died, they would lose everything they had fought for. Then Shung-min asked if they really wanted him to live no matter what, and were even willing to sacrifice their lives for that. Even if everyone else died, their battle would not have been in vain because they knew what they were getting into. That was the background of their fight. And now Tai-hyun stood in front of Hyun Nim, saying that it was quite a sad ending for Nine Knives. He noticed that their boss was nowhere to be seen and asked him about it, asking if he had abandoned them. Sun Min was indeed riding in the car. His organization was left behind, and with it, its loyal members. He sat there in a depressed mood, wondering what the point would be if only he, the director, survived. He was overcome with regret because he had done everything he could to raise Il-Hack from the ashes, but in the end, he had only ruined him completely. Sun Man wanted to say that the master was wrong, but he interrupted him, telling him not to call him that. In despair, he asked himself how long he would remain the young master, and when he would become Il-Hack's real boss. Seeing that he was not in the best mood, Sun Man said that this was not what he meant. He was about to continue and add a few words of encouragement when suddenly a motorcycle jumped out onto the road. It was Deadline who had foreseen their retreat and had even placed spikes on the road so that they could not pass. Sun Man noticed them in time, but it was impossible to get around such an obstacle, so he was forced to turn the car around. To top it all off, there were also the weather conditions, as it was raining heavily outside, which only made it more difficult to get around. Fortunately, at the last moment the car was stopped, Shung-min opened the door, going outside. He asked what it was, but at that moment, Sunman got out of the car and said that he would go on without him. As he closed the door, he said that the director still had a lot to do, but he believed in him and that he could handle it. He walked up to him and shielded him from the rain with his hand, saying that they all believed in him, because he had already shown that he was worthy of being called their boss. Lee Sun-mong looked at him like a father would look at a child who was about to leave him and begin adulthood. He took his face in his hand, saying that there was something else that he should not forget and always remember. Sun Min knew where to run. His suit was completely wet from the rain, but he didn't care at all. The last words Sun Man had spoken to him back then were a reminder that he was their boss, and they, the Knives of Il-Hack, would always be his support. He couldn't run any further, and fell to his knees in the middle of the sidewalk as the rain continued to spit on his unprotected back. Passers-by walked and looked back at him, but he didn't even pay attention, because it wasn't his own image that he should be uniting about now. He thought that no matter how pathetic the situation the organization was in might seem, He is Ilhack's CEO and is solely responsible for her well-being. Then Sunmon told him that there was nothing the knives couldn't do for him, so he thought he should repay them in kind. There was only one place he could think of where he could run for help, and now he was standing at the entrance to the Tason group. Jinwoong, Yisu, and Jungho looked in surprise at the guy who didn't even look like the director anymore. Chungho recognized his master with horror and rushed to him, asking what had happened to him. Yisu also asked for an explanation, arguing that his condition was indescribable. Then the fateful moment came for Seung-min, however. After thinking for a while, he still overcame himself and began to speak at breakneck speed. He said he had to trust Tason. No. He begged them to help him save Ilhack and the 9 knives. He knelt down, thinking that he would even roll at their feet if necessary, until they agreed to help him. Suddenly, he couldn't see where he stepped and his foot started to move. But someone grabbed him by the shoulders. It was Yisu. He said that he almost fell and suggested that they go inside where they could discuss everything, since the director was soaking wet. Hearing these words and realizing that Tason was agreeing to help, he looked at Yisu, addressing him as Do-kyung. He said that he himself was fine, but the knives from Gudo needed it more, since Gorang had attacked them half an hour ago. Jungho and Jinwoong looked at him in surprise, and Yisu asked him to tell everything more slowly, since nothing was clear yet. Of course, this is sarcasm. He said that they were just discussing something interesting, but could not decide on one point. He explained by saying that they were going to destroy the committee, but they didn't know where the best place to start was, from Cheonwoon or from HHS, and maybe it would have been better to start with Gorang Group, since they were connected with Ilhack. He said this with a characteristic furious look in his eyes, because this was his new plan. The hospital had good conditions for all patients, but special wards were reserved for those like him. Sue checked the medicine that was attached to the IV. It was important to her that everything worked well. She looked at the one she cared about. This man meant much more to her than an ordinary boss. Lying on the bed was Baek Do-kyung, who had been hospitalized in hopes of being saved after being seriously injured, but he had fallen into a coma and had never woken up since. Sun-min recalled his childhood, which took place in a rather unusual place because he was not an ordinary child. At that time, the head of Ilhack was Lee Sung-han, who was the highest point in Seoul, and at that moment he decided to light a cigarette. Then, little Lee Sung-min approached him and asked if the old man had smoked again, and he began to wave his hand and hide the cigarette. He was only 8 years old then, the successor to Lee Seung-hak, and he pointed a sword at his grandfather, saying that he had ordered no one to smoke here. The grandfather decided to play along, saying that he was scared and promised not to smoke anymore if the boy hid the weapon. He asked who taught his grandson such words, and Seung-min said that his uncle Jung-ho taught him. The boy said that Uncle Jung-ho was an excellent knife fighter and asked if Grandpa could fight like that too. The old man replied that he couldn't do that, but Seung-min didn't believe him, saying that he was the best in Seoul, and he started pulling him by the hand to show his skills. The boy said that his grandfather was not the best of the best back then, and he replied that it was not necessary to have superiority in combat for that. He became serious and said that for this it was enough to have strength of spirit and not fall on your knees before anyone. Little Sun-min did not immediately understand these words, or rather, he did not understand them at all. He told his grandfather that he should have admitted right away that he was a weakling, but he only smiled in response. This was the story of the creation of Ilhack, which was founded by Chairman Lee Sung-hak in central Seoul. And now, as Seung-min lay in the Tason headquarters, it all seemed like just a dream to him. He stood up and Jung-ho immediately asked if he was okay, and Seung-min replied that he was fine and there was no need to worry. Returning to his memories, he thought that, like any dream, this one had to end sooner or later. He said that Ilhack fell, tears welled up in his eyes, and Jung-ho's face became such that it was even pitiful to look at. Then Yisu and Jin-woong entered the room, and the director of Daesan sat down on the sofa next to Seung-min, seeing that he was in a bad mood. He asked how he was feeling while getting out the tea service. Instead of his boss, Jung-ho answered, saying that thanks to Tason, he was recovering rapidly. Yisu said that it wasn't very noticeable yet, but they could stay here as long as they needed and have a good rest. Jung-ho replied that they were just helping each other, to which Yisu said that was exactly what he was thinking about. He asked if Ilhack would be able to support them, and Jung-ho immediately rushed to reassure him, but was interrupted. Yisu said that he appreciated his nobility, but now he was asking the director of their organization. He poured tea into a beautiful cup, then smiled and asked if Mr. Choi Jung-ho was the boss now. This puzzled the old man a little, but Seung-min asked him to wait outside since he himself had something to discuss with director Do-kyung. Jin-eun offered to accompany him. even though he saw how sadly he left the room where the fate of his organization was being decided. After they left, Seung-min turned to Yi-soo, saying that before they discussed something, he wanted to ask a question. He asked if Baek Yi-soo was the real head of Daesun, calling him by name. He also wanted to know where Mr. Baek Do-kyung was now. But Yi-soo interrupted him by placing his cup of tea on the table. He said that in front of others he called him Do-kyung, and he hadn't even revealed his identity to Jong-ho. But there were some things he didn't understand. He said that he, Seung-min, should be scared because they were facing something they couldn't handle. And if that's the case, then they should still be scared, not asking stupid questions. Hearing this answer, Seung-min thought that he had gone too far, because it seemed like this topic was a sore point for Brother Do-kyung. Right now, they need to be as nice to Tason as possible, so he said it really didn't matter. He asked if Yi-soo was going to work with Haack, but he replied that there was no point since he was too weak now. Then Seung-min rephrases the question, asking if they can help them, since he needs to know the answer to this. But Yi-soo decided to act tough, saying that he did not ask for his opinion, but rather wanted to know how Haack could be useful to them. Sun-min thought for a moment and then said that they were going to destroy Gorang and the entire committee. But would they have enough strength? He continued by saying that Haack was a sister organization of the committee, but despite this, Gorang attacked them. So if he, as the director of Haack, reports this to the committee, Gorang will pay the fine for violating the terms of the contract. Sun-min said that the current Haack might be weak, but the legality of their actions still remained. However, Yi-soo interrupted him, saying that this was not what he meant, since Hack's main problem was Mr. Seung-min himself. In other words, he was a weakling. He asked how they were supposed to take them seriously if the director of the organization was on his own. The HHS office was located in the Ganjam area, and Tae-hyun had already appreciated it, calling it a fancy place. He sat in the office of HHS chairman Han Hae-sung, who asked him how he was going to clean up the mess he had made. He didn't understand why his organization attacked Haack, since they were both members of the General Assembly. However, Tae-hyun just chuckled, replying that he did it because he wanted to, since ever since he was a child, he did things first and thought later. But Hae-sung didn't share his enthusiasm, saying that he wouldn't take his side, but Tae-hyun simply told him to wait. Hae-sung replied that the main thing was not to anger Seung-min, but Tae-hyun just laughed, saying that he didn't yet know where the next meeting would be. The place was specially chosen for the young master. It was the house of his grandfather Lee Sung-hak. Seung-min also found out about this and became angry, because it was too much and Tae-hyun had gone too far. He walked to his grandfather's house, and the men from Gorang joked that he was just taking a stroll there, since the place was familiar to him. He continued walking amid mocking laughter. Some even recognized him as the director. But this did not stop them. He remembered the words that Yi-soo had told him back then. He had said that without the Haack knives, he was just the heir to a fallen organization. Then he looked at the men and realized that they weren't even from Gorang. He had to prove something himself. He had to prove on his own that he was worthy of being called the head of Haack. And at that moment, a cigarette butt was thrown at him. He realized that he had to follow the example of the men of the Nine Knives and do everything in his power to achieve this. Gorang's immediate supervisor came out to them and said that a closed meeting was currently taking place. Only the heads of the 4 largest organizations were allowed to attend. But Seung-min interrupted him, telling him to get out of the way. At first, the man didn't understand that he was being disobeyed, but Seung-min yelled at him to move his ass and get out of here, and he pounced on him. The rest stood and looked in surprise at what was happening at the front entrance, but no one dared to interfere. Seung-min managed to knock out the big guy because he caught him off guard, but he still had to fight today. Another guard was already rushing towards him with a wooden stick, asking what this idiot was doing here. He hit him on the head with a stick, and Seung-min didn't even have time to put his hands up to defend himself, because he had never fought before. But he remembered his grandfather's words, who said that it was no big deal if a guy didn't know how to fight. The main thing is that he must be strong in spirit and never fall to his knees before others, no matter how strong the enemy was. Now that Seung-min finally understood his words, as they accurately reflected his situation, he decided to listen to his grandfather. Even though the man hit him, he was still able to fight to the end and grabbed him by the throat. His gaze spoke for him. An incredible strength appeared from somewhere, and he felt that he would not yield to anyone else. With these thoughts, he hit his head on the man's nose, but another one had already appeared from the room, this one with a knife. Luckily, this was noticed by one of the workers, who was actually none other than Shi-on. He put his hand on the man's shoulder, saying that this was beyond the pale because it was wrong. And then he hit him and he fell, dropping his knife. which Xian successfully confiscated for the benefit of the organization. Taking off his cap, he said that freaks like him should know their place and not get involved in other people's squabbles. After all, there was a generally accepted rule that only bosses could enter, and right now they were holding one of them back. 3 of them had already gathered. Haack and Tason were still missing, but Taehyun suggested starting the meeting already. However, the others asked whether it would not have been better to wait for Director Lee from Haack, since it was about him that they were talking. It was clear that Taehyun could barely contain his laughter when Seung-min's name was mentioned, and he asked if he really wasn't invited. He added that he didn't think he would have the courage to come here, even though he was a victim. However, the next moment, Seung-min entered the room. His appearance was completely inconsistent with his status, but he was worried about it. There was blood on his hands, and the members of the General Assembly looked at him in surprise. Taehyun looked especially puzzled. Sun-min addressed him, calling him a bastard who apparently didn't know one rule. He looked at him in surprise, not expecting this from Director Haack, and he held a cigarette in his mouth. Sun-min continued, pointing directly at her and saying that smoking was prohibited in this house. He walked up to him and took the cigarette right out of his mouth, and then said that he would answer him what he had once answered the owner of this house. He said that if he caught him here with a cigarette again, he would kill him on the spot, and his look confirmed his words. In dark times, Haack made the rules, and Lee Seung-hak, the highest point in Seoul, enforced them. He dreamed of entering the political arena, but nothing came of it. His dream remained unfulfilled until his death. Eventually, Haack began to disintegrate, with everyone desperately fighting for control of the weakened organization. A war broke out between the 9 Knives of Haack and other capital factions. The criminal community had set up a bloody massacre in Seoul, but soon it was time for a change. Lee Seung-hak, tired of watching the situation get worse day by day, made a decision. The decision ended the feud between the organizations, but it was not an easy one. It consisted of dividing the criminal world into spheres of influence and appointing leaders of 4 groups. This is how the committee of 4 major organizations emerged, whose roots went back to Haack. Now, Ryu Tae-hyun, forgetting about Chairman Lee Seung-hak's wishes, violated the committee's agreement and attacked Haack. The girl from the assembly told him to work hard to give a clear justification for his actions. Otherwise, Gorang would become a common enemy of the entire committee. But Tae-hyun didn't take her words seriously, saying that she couldn't decide anything for everyone here. He then advised her to watch her language, otherwise they would be missing another participant at the next meeting. The girl was about to stand up, asking how he dared to say such a thing. But at that moment, Seung-min walked in. This was something they had talked about before, but now he was already in a meeting and Tae-hyun even became a little tense. Meanwhile, Sun-min took the cigarette from him and sat down in his seat, starting the conversation with a reprimand for the organization. He asked if this was some kind of kennel, and if not, then why were there so many mongrels there, all wanting to fight? Suddenly, Tae-hyun laughed, but it was an angry laugh. He swept all the dishes off his half of the table, asking when he had managed to become so bold. He said that Seung-min was finally acting like a man, asking if the realization that his days were numbered had changed him so much. And Seung-min just smiled strangely, saying that thanks to him, he came to his senses after his head was almost smashed. Meanwhile, the other council members demanded an explanation from Tae-hyun, but Seung-min said that he would explain everything himself. He said that they knew that Gorang had attacked Haack, and that they had just tried to attack him again. Gorang broke the rule prohibiting committee members from attacking each other, and took Haack's property for himself. Based on this, he, as the director of Haack, asked to exclude Gorang from the committee, depriving him of all rights. He asked Tae-hyun if he had any objections, but he replied in the negative, saying that he had indeed screwed up. But then he continued, saying that Seung-min had mixed something up. After all, wasn't Haack the one who spat on the agreement first? He pulled out a photo of the moment he made the deal with Tason, saying that the 2 organizations had clearly become closer recently. And then he suddenly accused him, saying that this is how he set Tason on them, who then left their committee. However, Seung-min said that he was only transferring files for synchronization and that it had nothing to do with Gorang. But Tae-hyun also didn't back down, saying that in the past, there was a squabble between Gorang and Tason over the Hanam area. He continued by saying that Seung-min decided this was his chance, and a little later, several of their groups were ambushed. It turned out that Haack had used connections outside the committee to organize the raid on Gorang, which meant that they had started it first. He asked Seung-min if he had said everything correctly or if he had made a mistake somewhere, because he understood that he could no longer get out of it. After all, He understood that he would not dare to show the organization's files to everyone present. He then decided to make his position clear, saying that he wanted to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. At that moment, as if on cue, men in black suits from the Gorang group emerged from the side where he was sitting. Taehyun said he believes Ilhak's leader, Lee Seung-min, should be held responsible for breaking the agreement. He went on to say that he also insisted on the dissolution of this senseless committee, and everyone present was surprised. And Soo foresaw this yesterday, saying that Gorang would demand that the committee be abolished, since it serves as a support for Ilhak. Seung-min said that there was no point in him going to the meeting then, but Yi-soo replied that he had to prove who was boss. At this meeting, he needed to show that he was worthy of being called the head of Ilhak. When Taehyun finished his speech, the others began to express their dissatisfaction, but Seung-min only closed his eyes. He said that he didn't care about Gorang's threats at all, and if Taehyun didn't want to be a member of the committee, let him do whatever he wanted. HHS Director Hae-sung said Seung-min was being unreasonable, adding that he should have kneeled down and begged for help. Then Seung-mi said that it was now obvious that Gorang and HHS were in sync since Hae-sung was supporting Gorang. Then a girl intervened in the conversation. She said that the guys were making a mistake by starting a war in this way. She put on her glasses and snapped her fingers, and a shadow and a hand holding a machete appeared behind her. She said that they could continue to talk nonsense, but they should keep in mind that she would definitely take one of their heads with her. Looking at her people, Seung-min thought that they were the same infamous Baek-jung of Cheonun, but they seemed to be in China. Taehyun ignored her gesture. He slammed his hand on the table, telling Seung-min that this wasn't something he should worry about. He stood up from his seat and walked over to him, then sat down on the edge of the table, saying that he had other problems now. After all, he no longer had the 9 knives, which meant he couldn't escape anywhere now. Taehyun leaned towards him and asked if he really thought he would grab all the files for himself and not share them with anyone. Sun-min, to his surprise, simply agreed, saying that he was right. He really wasn't able to carry everything. As he spoke, footsteps were heard, which could only mean one thing. The last member of the committee had arrived. The guards who stood at the entrance could not stop him, because he had the right to be present. When he was already at the door, Yi-soo stopped for a moment and called out Ryu Taehyun, mimicking his name. He entered accompanied by Jin-woon and Jung-ho, saying that he didn't mind playing with Gorang and Taehyun himself. Then he saw the big picture of the situation and continued to talk mockingly about the stoppage, which was only getting worse. He asked if he had interfered with the 2 directors' decision on serious issues, adding that he wanted to join them too. Taehyun was puzzled and asked if it wasn't Do-kyung himself, who said that he didn't want to have anything to do with the committee. And Soo answered him what a fool he was, because the committee and the agreement were nothing, saying that Taehyun himself thought the same. Taehyun understood why Seung-min didn't speak out in favor of keeping the committee, saying that he was even a little offended by how close they had become. Yi-soo confirmed his words, saying that everything was correct, because after all, Seung-min was their chairman. While everyone was surprised, he continued, "They say that Tason shares the beliefs of Ilhak's previous prejudice. Therefore, they will support Ilhak and nominate Lee Seung-min as the next chairman." So he told Taehyun to get ready, since finishing them off would be his initial goal. He then turned to the rest of the congregation, saying that they in turn would have to make a choice. Either they will show Lee Seung-hak's will the respect it deserves and agree to his proposal, or they will fall to the level of brainless scumbags. Here he looked at Taehyun, meaning him. However, he said that everything was already written on their faces, because each had already made a decision for themselves. When he said this, the girl clenched her fist, which was a sign for her people to hide their weapons. Yi-soo turned to Seung-min, saying that they should also finish up, since they had other things to do. Now he had a different status. He was no longer the CEO, but the chairman of Ilhak, with Tason as an ally. On the way, Yi-soo asked if he was okay, to which Seung-min replied, "Can't you tell?" saying that they should have arrived earlier. But Yi-soo just smiled slightly, saying that it was cool, so everything went pretty well. He said he was a little lost, having never been there before, when he suddenly saw a man standing below. His pupils narrowed in surprise, because he didn't expect to see this person at all, especially under such circumstances. Standing in front of him was none other than Chief Jang, who, upon seeing him, greeted him as Baek Do-gyun. He said that they had not seen each other for a long time, and now they finally met again. His face expressed pure innocence, but Yi-soo's face showed the opposite emotions, because in front of him stood the killer of his small squad. Jang stood at the beginning of the stairs and began to walk up to them, saying that he didn't expect to see Tason here. Yi-soo quietly called him Chief Jang, but Seung-min heard and asked again if it was really Chief Jang. After all, he knew that he was responsible for the collapse of synchronization. Moreover, he was behind the One Sync project. This man was responsible for everything that happened to him and Haack. And he was also one of the bosses. Sun Min wanted to shout at Yisu to let him know about it, but he only managed to say his last name since it was impossible to say his real name. Besides, he realized that he already knew everything perfectly well, because a knife flashed in his hand, with which he began to go down to meet the boss. Yisu knew that they were 2.1 meters apart, and it would only take him a couple of seconds to finish him off. After all, back then, the boss treated them in exactly the same way for his own purposes. He didn't care about other people's lives. Then, for some reason, he did not hesitate, killing all the members of the squad, from which only Shi-on miraculously managed to escape. This was also the case with Baek Yi-soo, whom he created. The same as his boss, he should have done the same. He came close to the boss, who was protected by the light reflected from his glasses, so that Yi-soo could not see his eyes. But Jang could clearly see his eyes, which were filled with unmistakable hatred and contempt for him.